over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you, and it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff, and you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. Our book today is Mortal Republic, How Rome Fell into Tyranny by Edward J. Watts. This is from the first chapter, which I think is really more like an introduction. This book explains why Rome, still one of the longest-lived republics in world history, traded the liberty of political autonomy for the security of autocracy. It's written at a moment when modern readers need to be particularly aware of both the nature of the republics and the consequences of their failure. We live in a time of political crisis when the structures of republics as diverse as the United States, Venezuela, France, and Turkey are threatened. Many of these republics are the constitutional descendants of Rome, and as such, they have inherited both the tremendous structural strengths that allowed the Roman Republic to thrive for so long, and some of the same structural weaknesses that led eventually to its demise. This is particularly true of the United States, a nation whose basic constitutional structure was deliberately patterned on the idealized view of the Roman Republic presented by the 2nd century BC author Polybius. This conscious borrowing from Rome's model makes it vital for all of us to understand how Rome's Republic worked, what it achieved, and why, after nearly 5 centuries, its citizens ultimately turned away from it and toward the autocracy of Augustus. No republic is eternal. It lives only as long as its citizens want it. And in both the 21st century AD and the 1st century BC, when a republic fails to work as intended, its citizens are capable of choosing the stability of autocratic rule over the chaos of a broken republic. When freedom leads to disorder and autocracy promises a functional and responsive government, even citizens of an established republic can become willing to set aside long-standing principled objections to the rule of one man and embrace its practical benefits. Rome offers a lesson about how citizens and leaders of a republic might avoid forcing their fellow citizens to make such a tortured choice. Rome shows that the basic, most important function of a republic is to create a political space that is governed by laws, fosters compromise, shares government responsibility among a group of representatives, and rewards good stewardship. Politics in such a republic should not be a zero-sum game. The politician who wins a political struggle may be honored, but one who loses should not be punished. The Roman Republic did not encourage its leaders to seek complete and total political victory. It was not designed to force one side to accept everything the other wanted. Instead, it offered tools that, like the American filibuster, served to keep the process of political negotiation going until a mutually agreeable compromise was found. This process worked very well in Rome for centuries, but it worked only because most Roman politicians accepted the laws and norms of the Roman Republic. They committed to working out their disputes in the political arena that the Republic established rather than through violence in the streets. Republican Rome succeeded in this more than perhaps any other state before or since. If the early and middle centuries of Rome's Republic show how effective this system can be, the last century of the Roman Republic reveals the tremendous dangers that result when political leaders cynically misuse these consensus-building mechanisms to obstruct a republic's functions. Like politicians in modern republics, Romans could use vetoes to block votes on laws. They could claim the presence of unfavorable religious conditions to annul votes they disliked, and they could deploy other parliamentary tools to slow down or shut down the political process if it seemed to be moving too quickly toward an outcome that they disliked. When used as intended, these tools help promote negotiations and political compromises by preventing majorities from imposing solutions on minorities. But in Rome, as in our world, politicians could also employ such devices to prevent the republic from doing what its citizens needed. The widespread misuse of these tools offered the first signs of sickness in Rome's republic. Much more serious threats to republics appear when arguments between politicians spill out from the controlled environments of representative assemblies and degenerate into violent confrontations between ordinary people in the streets. Romans had avoided political violence for 3 centuries before a series of political murders rocked the republic in the 130s and 120s BC. Once mob violence infected Roman politics, however, the institutions of the republic quickly lost their ability to control the contexts and content of political disputes. Within a generation of the first political assassination in Rome, politicians had begun to arm their supporters and use the threat of violence to influence the votes of assemblies and the elections of magistrates. Within 2 generations, Rome fell into civil war, and 2 generations later, Augustus ruled as Roman emperor. When the republic lost the ability to regulate the rewards given to political victors and the punishments inflicted on the losers of political conflicts, Roman politics became a zero-sum game in which the winner reaped massive rewards and the losers often paid with their lives. Above all else, the Roman Republic teaches the citizens of its modern descendants the incredible dangers that come along with condoning political obstruction and courting political violence. Roman history could not more clearly show that when citizens look away as their leaders engage in these corrosive behaviors, the Republic is in mortal danger. Unpunished political dysfunction prevents consensus and encourages violence. In Rome, it eventually led Romans to trade the Republic for the security of an autocracy. This is how a republic dies, mortal republic.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hello, everybody. Well, the Bill Barr bald assertion is in. The Mueller report is in, too. We haven't seen it. But the Barr letter, or the Barr bald assertion, that has been submitted. My name is Jefferson Smith. I'm sitting in for our dear friend Thom Hartmann, who is out of the country. The call-in number here is 202-808-9925. It's 202-808-9925. Your calls are welcome as we try to come to grips with what now, as we try to come to grips with what we know and haven't yet learned. Want to start with the facts. What are the facts? What do we know now? Other questions we'll raise. What do we think about this investigation? What do we think about Bob Mueller's role in it? What conclusions can we draw, given we haven't seen it? What we've seen is a 4-page letter from Donald Trump's appointed new Attorney General. What was Bill Barr's role? Did he do his job? What job was he hired for? Later on the show, I want to ask this question. Why might this be good for democracy? If it's not a silver lining, why might it be a steel lining? And how might we need to steel ourselves? Why do we need to see the whole report? Why isn't Bill Barr's word, his 4-page letter, his brief conclusions sufficient? And as I intimated, what now? We want to hear from you today. This has dominated, I think, far too greatly the public discourse for the past 2 years. I think it has far too greatly dominated the discourse for the past 2 years. That said, given that it has dominated the public discourse, we ought to have at least a little bit of discourse about what's happening now. And you can do that by calling 202-808-9925. I want to start with facts. Facts first, conclusions second. In fact, part of my concern, spoiler alert, with the Bill Barr bald assertion is that it makes me a little nervous, and not just me, but the person who wrote the special prosecutor statute, that it seems like he may have made conclusions first and facts second. But let us deal in facts first, conclusions second. Conclusions, yes, based on principles, but if those principles go so far as to bend the facts, then they drift into the worst shade of ideology. This is not how democracy can work. So whether it's climate change or immunization or gun violence or the health impacts of wealth disparities, let's lead with facts. Here are some. What we do know is that there is a charge, that there is significant evidence demonstrating that there was Russian attempted interference with American elections in 2016. There are basically four conclusions that have been drawn. One was that there was Russian interference. And I'll borrow from Ari Milber, who said if all of this stuff came out today, if each of the four things I'm about to say came out today, if each of the indictments came out today, it would be one of the largest bombshells in political history. But because it's happened over time, today, the presidential propaganda apparatus has a sentence in a 4-page letter that they can use to say complete exoneration, which is what they've been saying. What I would say is that if all the information came out today, it would seem like a big, big deal. I also, later in the show, want to talk about why and justify my claim that there's been too much attention on the Mueller investigation from the beginning, and that we have to put more attention where it ought to be, and I'll talk about where I think that ought to be. But if we say facts first, conclusions second, here are some of the facts and some of the conclusions that have been offered. First, Russian interference. Second, 37 indictments. Now, a bunch of those are Russian nationals. We are not an extradition country with Russia. We do not have an extradition treaty. We cannot bring over all of the Russian nationals who have been charged, but 7 Americans. Those Americans include the two people who have worked with the current president literally longer than anyone other than members of his immediate family. His lawyer and fixer, and Roger Stone, Michael Cohen being the first, and Roger Stone, and a third person being his campaign manager, Paul Manafort. That's second. Third, that Robert Mueller did not charge conspiracy between Russia and the Trump campaign. So he said there was a Russian conspiracy. There was an effort by a nation state to interfere with American elections. That is charged. It is not charged that that was in close cahoots with the Trump campaign. I want to be really careful about something, though. First, I don't want to go so far as to say, oh, based on my opinions of the current president of the United States, I have more facts than Bob Mueller has, or even more facts than Bill Barr has. I don't want to do that. But I also want to be, I want to implore us to ask other media organizations to be careful. When they offer headlines that say Mueller finds no conspiracy, Mueller finds no connection between Russian interference and the Trump campaign, that is not accurate. First of all, because we have not seen the Mueller report. Second, so at the very least it needs to say Bill Barr finds. But second of all, let's say what it finds. What it finds is it was not charged. One of the things we need to understand by looking at the Mueller report is, was that because there was evidence that demonstrated it didn't happen, or because based on the standard of proof, which would happen in a criminal proceeding, and that's beyond a reasonable doubt, and based on the conspiracy charges require intent information, it wasn't charged because it'd be too hard to prove. The latter seems at least as likely, maybe more likely than the former. So when they say, it showed that there was not a conspiracy, let's be really careful. And some media organizations have been better than others. That what we know is that the Attorney General, selected by this president, has said that there was insufficient evidence to charge. That is different than saying that conduct did or did not occur. The fourth thing, again, first, there was Russian interference, or at least enough evidence to indict. Second, there were 37 indictments. Third, that there was not a charge of connection with the Russian conspiracy to the White House, and fourth, that there was no exoneration on obstruction. Let's dwell on this for a moment. The argument by Bill Barr, and by the way, this was his argument before he had seen the Mueller report. This was his argument before he was Attorney General. This was his cover letter to apply for the job. Was he said, well, the president gets to do stuff, and because the president gets to do stuff, it's very hard for a president to be accused, indicted, and convicted of obstruction of justice. The claim that the do you need something? The claim that there was no obstruction of justice is that it was not charged, but that's different than the previous claim. It is different than the claim on conspiracy. We'll talk about why and how right after this break. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff, sitting in. Proud to do so. The call-in line, we'll get to your calls right after this, 202-808-9925. Thanks.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
What are the critical facts that we need to have in our minds? We'll be taking your calls coming up next. We're on with Free Speech TV. We've got Bill from Sebastian, Florida. How you doing, Bill?
Yeah, good afternoon, Jefferson. Bill Barr, he has this record in the past for representing presidents with some shady transgressions going back to the Bush administration. I'd like to know what cases he worked on when he was in private practice. And I also think the media has done an awful job on too much coverage and not looking into our withdrawal from the International Criminal Court, let's say, and the ramifications that might bring about, Jefferson.
Yeah, and we poking around, I actually thought there was too little, significantly too little, analysis of Bill Barr when he was appointed. In fact, I'm gonna crib from a piece that Tom wrote, the headline being "Cover Up General Barr Strikes Again." Thom Hartmann did not coin the phrase "cover up general." That was actually coined by the New York Times's very own William Safire, and not based on this, but based back in 1992, when Iraq-Gate and Iran-Contra looked to implicate the Bush family, and Barr blocked the then independent counsel from investigating that further. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. We can also look at his private practice. We don't even need to look at his private practice to understand why he was appointed, what his job was. His job was not to take down a president. His job did not border on taking down a president. The question is, was his job, in fact, to shield and protect the president? And if one were starting with that hypothesis and evaluating that hypothesis based on available facts that you might look at include the fact that, well, the last time he had this chance to be Attorney General, be Deputy Attorney General, to work with a presidential administration, he did, in fact, protect the president, shield them from further investigation by blocking the subpoena of additional information that looked to implicate that president. And more recently, that he wrote a memo saying, well, president, really hard to make a president guilty of obstruction of justice, a view that I would deem an extreme view, certainly not the dominant view of people, certainly not the view of my constitutional law professor, Lawrence Tribe, who said, well, of course, the analogy that was used by the guy who drafted the special counsel statute was, because Bill Barr's argument then, before he read the Mueller report, was that you can't A president can't, it's not obstruction of justice for them to apply executive authority because they have executive authority. Well, the counter argument is, yeah, I have a laptop. I use that laptop to, if you say I should look up Bill Barr's private practice information, well, maybe I can do that quickly. I'm allowed to do anything I want with my laptop. But if I'm being investigated for a crime and there is evidence on my laptop and I hurl my laptop into the ocean, I'm allowed to hurl my laptop in the ocean under any circumstances. But if I hurl it into the ocean for that reason and at that time, that's obstruction of justice. It doesn't matter that I have control over my laptop. So I think what we already know, even before we go into Bill Barr's private practice about Bill Barr, would give us some understanding who this dude was before he wrote this letter. And we knew that already. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. That was our other friend, Bill. We'll be back right after this. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. We're taking your calls. Again, the topic of the day that is already lighting up the telephone. The telephone number is 202-808-9925. The topic of the day is, of course, the Bill Barr letter. I did not say the Mueller report because we have not seen or read the Mueller report. What we know is that Bill Barr, the hand-picked Attorney General of this president, who he picked after the previous Attorney General had recused himself, who lost his job because he had recused himself, because the president wanted somebody who would put his fingers on the investigation. So instead, he hires Bill Barr. Bill Barr is someone who we know had worked in the Bush administration and blocked the then independent counsel for subpoenaing information that looked to implicate the then president over Iraqgate and over Iran-Contra. Then he went into private practice, and now he's back, and prior to being back, had written a memo saying, President, nah, you can't go after a president for obstruction of justice because they wield executive power and they have every right to fire people as a method of executing their executive power. I want to respond to that argument. He has made that argument. Now we know, based on his letter, what he thinks. We don't yet know what Mueller thinks. We want to hear what you think. Denise from Chicago, speak your piece.
Hi, Jeff. I talked to you once before, and it was such a delight. And so really cool that we've got your perspective, too, on today. But as soon as I heard the original statement, and I won't tell you what channel I was on, if I can say it, you can let me know. But I listened very intently as I was just, anticipating this to break, right? Yep. And my first digest of hearing the facts, okay, told me immediately that he was not exonerated. There were additionally things that were surprising me about Mueller, because there was all this buildup to what a great American he is, and I don't doubt that at all. It's just, it seems like there was a little bit of disappointment in the man Mueller. And my next thought was all of the pundits that have been supporting Barr on both sides, saying, "Oh no, Barr is friends with Mueller," and I knew from that point, when the minute I started hearing that that's a problem. I don't really care who Mueller is friends with or who Barr is friends with. It's about the law. But the immediate statement, I'm trying to get to my main point.
Sure, go ahead.
The immediate point, the more immediate interpretation I reached was this was not an exoneration by no means. The minute that they took off the reading of the script, they went to a reporter who immediately said Trump has won, he has been exonerated. That is so irresponsible of our press, and they should be called out, and that should be, I don't know what we can do. It was so irresponsible, and that set the tone for everything that dominoed after that, and it was just absolutely even ridiculous to continue to listen because it was so skewed from the minute that it was announced. That's my point.
Denise, thank you so much for calling in, and thank you for your kind word. It's a delight to talk to you as well. A few things in there, I'll say two. One, The Neil Katyal column in the New York Times. Neil Katyal is law professor at Georgetown. He drafted the special counsel regulations under which Robert Mueller was appointed. I got a question off the air that said, well, wait a minute, why wasn't there an independent counsel? Remember, there wasn't an independent counsel because the independent counsel statute had lapsed. Independent counsel statute was adopted after Nixon and used multiple times, including during Clinton and after the Clinton administration, after Whitewater and after the Monica Lewinsky scandal, if you will. It had sunsetted, and they did not re-up the sunset. So now we're in the same rules as we had been prior to the independent counsel regulations. Now there are special counsel regulations because there's no independent counsel statute. The guy who wrote those things, one of his points is, well, wait a minute. How is it that with 48 hours to go, 48 hours to analyze the Mueller report, there was a conclusion on that second claim? There are two big claims. One claim, Russian interference. And they said, okay, there was Russian interference, but we do not have chargeable evidence that there was a link between that Russian interference and the White House and the Trump campaign, to be more accurate. The second was obstruction of justice. Now, even Bill Barr, even a guy who essentially was acting as Donald Trump's lawyer, I would posit, even he does not say that that exonerates Trump, even in his interpretation. I want to go through these filters. Understand there are 5 levels to this, I think, at least. Okay, so first there are the facts. There's the stuff that happened. Second are what the witnesses say happened. That is a filter. Third is what the witnesses are actually able to get to testify. Not just what they might think or what they might see or what they might know, but in fact what they might say under oath. The next is what the Mueller report takes from those witness accounts. And then the next filter is Bill Barr saying what Mueller said, the witnesses thought that in fact happened. And the next filter is, as you mentioned, Denise, then the media reports of those. And you might even add another filter, which is the Trump campaign, Trump team's filter of how they characterize those things. So how the Trump team characterized the media coverage, characterizing the Bill Barr interpretation, characterizing the Mueller interpretation of what the witnesses said, of what the witnesses saw, of what in fact happened. That's a lot of filters through. And if each filter only adjusts a little bit, if each filter is only a little bit cloudy, by the time you get through all those filters, it's really, really cloudy. I am not starting with conclusions. I, in fact, think there has been significantly too much attention, too much faith, too much belief, too much expectation that this particular investigator, with the Congress that was evaluating it, with this particular president, with this particular Department of Justice, was going to do something to remove or do anything close to removing a president. I think that people who had those hopes were significantly over-hoping. Our job today to start is let's start with the facts. Let's try to get through those filters, each one of them, because there are several. We'll talk more about that when we get back to the Thom Hartmann Show. That was Denise. I'm Jeff. You're you. Love you. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. What do we know? Call in, share what we know.
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, "We've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze." End quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I'm Jeff. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Thanks for listening to us. And to those watching us, thanks for watching us. I wanted to get back to saying one thing that I teased but didn't complete. And that was the obstruction of justice argument that Bill Barr made. And there's something really important here. Something really important about how one characterizes the headline that is used about the conspiracy charge. Now, here is the Bill Barr argument. Bill Barr argument is, well, there was no conspiracy. And because there was no conspiracy, there really can't be obstruction either. There sort of could, but it goes to intent. If the person is not guilty, they wouldn't have intended to do things to avoid guilt of something they didn't do anyway. That's a pretty good argument. And this is another reason why it's important to see the Mueller report. Not because I think it's going to lead to the removal of a president. Not because I think that that removal of a president is going to dictate whether or not democracy is saved, whether the middle class is saved, or whether the planet is saved. But if we want to start with the facts, here's why those facts can matter. Again, his argument, well, there was no conspiracy, therefore there can be no obstruction. But if in the report what it says is something more like, well, here were indications of possible conspiracy. But because this witness died, because this witness didn't testify, because Paul Manafort lied and is going to jail for it, because Michael Cohen lied and is going to jail for it, we could not prove conspiracy. We could prove, we believe, that there was a Russian conspiracy, but not that we could not link that Russia conspiracy to Donald Trump. We couldn't prove it. But then, step two, various reasons we couldn't get to it was because of things that look tantamount to obstruction of justice. Then all of a sudden, instead of the Bill Barr move, where that first conclusion begets that second conclusion, instead it goes 180 degrees the other way. Instead, the very fact that it is hard to charge conspiracy is why the obstruction of justice claim matters. Because the flip of the Bill Barr argument, no. The reason we can't prove, this is not me saying it, this is what the argument would be, and could be borne out by more facts, that the reason we can't charge conspiracy is because the obstruction of justice, because justice is obstructed, because our view is obstructed, because we can't prove the conspiracy, because we can't see it. That in fact the second thing could be linked to the first thing in 180 degrees the other direction. I at least wanted to make that point. Let me jump on to Matt from Napa, who says that we can't link Trump to Russia. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, just a little bit of background. Before the 2006 election, my concern was the sentiment building against Russia to begin with. So I was almost willing to vote for Trump. I voted for Stein. Almost was willing to vote for Trump over the Democrats at that point, just on that concern. And, since the beginning of the 20th century, virtually every war we've gone into has had questionable backgrounds from our intelligence agencies. So I think there's every reason to be suspicious of them at a minimum. And the idea that we don't, as progressives, that we're not even suspicious to the point of that the anti-Trump movement might have, been co-opted to use it against the Russians, I think is odd. And then we have Binney and all the information about the downloads that's been, ignored. There is no real investigation as to whether the Russian hack even happened to begin with. And, the FBI asked the DNC whether they wanted to have it investigated. They didn't want to do it. They hired CrowdStrike, which was, a DNC-friendly organization. You had the Clapper information that got changed, that there was unanimous agreement between all 17 agencies when that wasn't even true, but still goes around in the media. And even Clapper himself, has admitted that's not true. There's no transparent process that proves the Russians did this.
All right, Matt, appreciate your perspective. Let's go to Marcia from Englewood, Florida. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Marcia, and it's good to talk to you again, Jeff. What's been bothering me about this whole thing, I don't know if that report will ever come out, the full report. But what bothers me is when you connect all the little things, a little thing being like the interpreter for Donald Trump that was one of our American Russian interpreters.
Yeah.
He went and confiscated his notes. If that isn't part of a cover-up, I don't know what is. And you can just go through the 2.5 years he's been in office and see tons of things like that. So how can they want to hide? And also, there's such a thing as a prima facie case, which means there's so many things that connect that it might even be possible to claim that William Barr himself is a part of the cover-up.
Well, I mean,
What is our Democratic Party doing about it?
Well, let me take the first thing and then the second thing about the whether Bill Barr is part of a cover-up, and then what the Democratic Party is doing. Here is Tom's piece. Tom's piece titled "Cover-Up General Barr Strikes Again," citing William Safire. The last time that Bill Barr was U.S. Attorney General, that William Safire called him "Cover-Up General Barr" because of his role in burying evidence of then-President George Bush the Elder's involvement with Iraq-Gate and Iran-Contra. That Bill Barr blocked the release of, the subpoena of information that looked to implicate the Bush presidency. That anybody who was paying attention to this, I mean, I would say, like, when Bill Barr was picked, I mean, let's at least put in a little bit of context, that when Trump's previous Attorney General was dismissed or resigned upon request, when he was dismissed, it was because he had recused himself. Trump said this on the record a bunch of times. He brought on Bill Barr. He needed an Attorney General who would be different than that, who would put his fingers on the investigation. So it's not... If there is, I mean, there are multiple indications of Bill Barr being involved in helping protect the president. Whether we call that a cover-up or something else, that does not seem to be that bold a claim. But appreciate your call. Brian from Blue Island, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, can Bill Barr himself be subpoenaed, or can Bill Barr be indicted for obstruction of justice? Is that a possibility?
He can be indicted. Jerry Nadler said that he hoped that, who is the head of the House Judiciary Committee, said he had hoped that it's a Judiciary Committee anyway, the chair of the relevant House committee, that he hope that Bill Barr wouldn't require subpoena to testify. Now, there is a chance that he could claim executive privilege, and this would get to the fight that I thought was going to happen. So there are a few things that I'm not surprised about, a few things that I am surprised about. I'm not surprised that there is not a charge of conspiracy between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. I'm not surprised by that. I did not anticipate that would come. It seemed like there's multiple reasons, including, and I'll offer my thoughts about Bob Mueller himself probably after the next break. I am surprised that there was not a fight over Donald Trump testifying. Because, see, obstruction of justice relies on intent. And asking the person who you are thinking about accusing, indicting, of obstruction of justice, well, why'd you do that? Why'd you get rid of your Attorney General? Why did you get rid of your FBI director? Why did you have this meeting? Why did you tell your son to characterize the meeting in the following way? Why did you hire all of these people that seem to have relationships with the Putin administration? Putin, I think, is a funny thing to say. There was never a chance to ask those questions. I thought there was going to be a fight over the request, the subpoena of the president. There might be, now that there is a House, because Bob Mueller is not a Democrat, is one explanation. But now that Jerry Nadler is in a position to subpoena, I think there could be this fight, and the fight would be over executive privilege, over whether the previous decision that Richard Nixon was subject to constitutional authority, was subject to Department of Justice authority, was subject to the subpoena power, that law was more important than just who's in the presidency. And I thought we were going to have that fight, but I thought that we were going to have that fight over whether Trump could be compelled to testify. Your question is, well, could they subpoena Bill Barr? Yes, they could, and then we might have the fight that I thought was going to come about a different person. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I was going to say also, you know, he was accused of obstructing in the Bush era. How many times does a criminal get to be appointed attorney general?
This is why I think he got, well, no, this is why I say that I'm surprised by how free a ride Bill Barr got. I think the fact that he was a high-paid lawyer was like, oh, okay, because so much of the narrative about Donald Trump was that he was a dum-dum. And this is related to why I thought that critique was overstated and misguided. And that so much of the analysis, oh, well, he uses bad language, he's such a weirdo, all of his people are such weirdos, he can't get the best people, just making fun of the guy. And so when he hires somebody that like, oh, well, that's a real lawyer, that's somebody who's like had a job before, you know, who's actually worked in government before, he's not just an Exxon guy, it's like, oh, he's like a breath of fresh air. But if you look at who Bill Barr was, he's the person you'd hire if you were a president who didn't want to get indicted. That's who you'd hire. Bill Barr would be the guy to hire. We'll be back.
Exactly.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Thanks for calling, Brian.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
If I dropped your call in accident, call back in, 202-808-9925. We are on Free Speech TV. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. Ruben, on from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. How you doing?
Okay, how you doing, Jeff?
Ruben, have you Googled Florida man and your birthday?
No.
Apparently, if you Google Florida man and your birthday, funny things happen. For me, I did it for my birthday, and it was about somebody driving a car down the highway with somebody gripping the front of it. But that's not why you called. Go ahead, Ruben.
No. Okay. And it's been going on for 2 years, right?
Yep.
I mean, everybody ain't dumb. They know what's going on. Now, this man been threatening a whole lot, even his lawyer and everything, but you got a nice Sam and everything like that. I think Mueller got ducked. I think he got ducked. He got in touch with some big people and it scared him up. That's why Barr in there. This whole thing gonna change. It's gonna fall, and a whole lot of people gonna go to jail. You watch to see that, I tell you. Yeah, that's all I got to say.
So you think Mueller got threatened?
Oh yeah. Something happened there.
So I'll offer a milder view, and I want to actually get into it just a little bit right after we come out of this short segment. But anybody who thinks that this kind of, if any of this is true, this was the biggest public crime in American history. The biggest heist. It was the heist of a presidency. That only happens if there is the capacity to sneak around really, really well. Now, you don't want to get in the trap that the very fact that you can't find something out is in fact proof that a conspiracy is true, because then any conspiracy could be true. But if one believes, if one takes the facts as you see them and conclude that there was in fact a conspiracy, and conclude, as Mueller apparently did, that there was in fact a conspiracy, but not that conspiracy was connected to the Trump administration. And if you say, well, something of that magnitude doesn't happen without some people getting threatened. And in fact, if you listen to Senator Ron Wyden, who said, well, just follow the trail of dead bodies. Don't follow the money. Follow the trail of dead bodies. You know that this was dangerous stuff going down. Whether that got to Mueller, that would not be my opening hypothesis. And by say opening hypothesis, one way to do science, one way to do facts is have hypothesis and test the hypothesis with the available information, your ability to test that hypothesis. I hear your hypothesis. Mine is a little bit different. I'll tease it with this. How is the Mueller chatter, the analysis, the evaluation, the praise of him, how is that like the discussion about the 2016 election itself? If you were going to hire Mueller, what kind of person do you think you're hiring? If you look at his own background, what would suggest to you that he would want to take down a president? What would suggest to you that he'd want to shake the foundations of the country? What suggests to you that he'd want to shake the very basic power structure of the country? What about Bob Mueller would suggest that? What about Bill Barr would suggest that he would avoid protecting a president? We'll talk about that and more in just a moment. And by the way, I just want to say thank you for watching Free Speech TV, and thank you to your local communities for airing this program. We'll be back. The call-in number here is 202-808-9925. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in, and honored to do so. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for participating. It is the very next day. It is the day after a political bomb was dropped, and that political bomb is Bill Barr's 4-page letter saying about the Mueller report, nothing to see here, no conspiracy, and because I say no conspiracy, therefore no obstruction. When in fact what it appears, citing Salon's article, Bill Barr's weasel words, their words, not mine, his weasel words, that it was not, there was a conclusion of a co-conspiracy, but it was not charged. There was not a chargeable conspiracy. And that there was evidence to either support or undercut a claim of obstruction of justice. And Bob Mueller raised up his hands and said, I don't want to make that call. I don't want to be the one to choose to make this difficult decision about whether to charge the president with obstruction of justice. Now, one reason I personally really want to see the Mueller report is, again, not because I think it leads to the impeachment of the president, but because I really want to understand the facts. And I want to understand what this tug and pull was, so each American can make their decision, so analysts can make their decision, so we can start from facts and then go to conclusions. But I want to address the thing I teased previously about Bob Mueller. What about his background? For those of you who thought, and shout out, by the way, to Sarah Kenzier on this as well. What about you thought that Bob Mueller would go the extra mile to try to indict a president, to try to challenge the essential power structure of the United States? What about his background would suggest to you that he would challenge the Republican power structure in the United States? And how is that like, and how is the analysis and discussion around Bob Mueller similar to the analysis and discussion around the 2016 election itself? We'll offer at least this. Remember when during the 2016 election, Donald Trump accused the election of being rigged? Remember that? What was the response? The response was all sorts of people who weren't big fans of Donald Trump saying, no, it's not rigged. How could you possibly say the election was rigged? The election is perfectly fine. The election is great. You're a dum-dum for saying the election is rigged. How dare you, sir, say the election was rigged? The election is not rigged. The election is fine. And then when later on there were questions about whether or not the election could be trusted, there were a bunch of people who had already said, no, wait a minute, the election was fine. Oh, wait a minute, crap. When Donald Trump and Donald Trump confederates said Bob Mueller's part of the deep state. He's friends with James Comey. These people can't be trusted. They're related somehow to something QAnon said one time on the something interwebs, which I saw in Alex Jones, sort of. You can't trust this Mueller investigation. It's a bunch of angry Democrats, and by that I mean relatively measured Republicans. You can't trust these angry Democrats. Well, then what happened? No. Mueller is unimpeachable. He's got a brilliant investigation team. He is a man of a marvelously strong jaw, and that marvelously strong jaw must indicate a marvelously strong spine. And that strong spine and that keen intellect and that rigor and that courage will lead to getting every fact out, even if those facts would shake the power structure of the country to its core. There's nothing to see. Mueller's great. Everybody had to say that. Even softened my language. I didn't want to pile on with the president, bash Mueller, but I did say this. The moment Mueller was appointed, I don't see this guy taking down a president. To me, the most likely thing is for him to come up with some investigation that absolutely shields the president. Why did I think that? Well, because I looked at his background. Not that I thought he was a dishonest guy. Not that I thought, as one of our callers did, that he was threatened. Not because I didn't think he cared about his integrity or was a bad lawyer. None of those things. But just looked at his background. What in Mueller's background suggests to you that he would take down a president? A Republican president, no less. What is his long time, I think lifetime, well, since he registered, Republican Party registration? Was it his military service in Vietnam? Was it his private law practice for Wilmer Hale, a law firm that has sent at least one of his partners to be a Trump-appointed federal judge, the same law firm that represented Jared Kushner? Was it Mueller's most recent public investigation? It was into the NFL. He was hired in private practice to investigate the NFL at the NFL's request. A little bit like being asked by the U.S. government to investigate the U.S. government. The NFL was being investigated about its handling of the Ray Rice incident. Ray Rice was charged with domestic violence, and he was suspended for just 2 games. And afterwards, it was reported that there was a tape that had been sent to the NFL with the incident. The NFL said they weren't really sure what had happened, but they were going to suspend for 2 games, but they had a tape. The NFL said, no, we didn't have a tape. Bob Mueller investigated, said, oh, no, they're fine. NFL did it just fine. And the results of that investigation were the continued wielding of power by the head of the NFL. There's another former white shoe lawyer. I look at Bob Mueller, and I don't think it's somebody who wouldn't do his duty, but his duty is a broad charge. And how would he define his duty? Would he define his duty to be Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis and stand up in the way of the vast power that had hired him? Or would he do something like saying, hey, it's a tough call. I'll leave that call to someone else. I look at Bob Mueller as somebody I would not expect to be an activist investigator. I would expect him to be a thorough investigator of many things, to do his duty, but his definition of his duty is within a relatively broad range. We're going to be back. You're starting to call in. We appreciate it. I'm Jeff. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. You're you. It's Mueller Day, I guess, but really it's Bill Barr Day. We'll talk more about him.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you, and it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff, and you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. Our book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from Chapter 1, titled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance, subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia, Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s, hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrists swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable to perpetual creation, be it Native Americans, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men, we have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly, as if weightless across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in. And joining us now, Congressman Ro Khanna, U.S. Congressman, 17th District from California, Yale Law School graduate, 2001. We're talking about the Bill Barr letter. We're not talking about the Mueller report because we don't have a Mueller report. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. How you doing?
Great to be on. I always love doing the Hartmann show.
So what do we know? What have we learned? I mean, we've been talking about it for a little bit. I have my own thoughts, but what did you learn? Either what surprised you or what didn't surprise you at all from the Bill Barr bald assertion letter?
Well, first of all, we know now beyond a doubt that the Russians interfered in the election, that the Russians wanted Donald Trump to win. They hacked emails to make that happen, and they used social media to manipulate people and to spread propaganda. Mueller conclusively finds this. So all of the Trump going to Helsinki and saying he believes Vladimir Putin more than our intelligence agencies, all of that is just flatly false. Second, we know that Mueller, after 2 years, found compelling evidence of possible obstruction, so much so that he said the president can't be exonerated. And here's what Mueller intended, because Mueller is a humble person. He didn't want to overstep. He said, look, let this evidence go to Congress or go to the American public, and it's for them to decide what to do with it. No one asked Bill Barr in 24 hours or 48 hours to try to opine and make a decision on something that Mueller was unable to do for 2 years. And he just blatantly inserted himself in the process and makes a conclusion with no validity and something that he is not supposed to do. I mean, the correct protocol should be for this evidence to come to Congress and for Congress to debate this.
Connect the dots on why seeing the report itself, not just the Barr letter, and not even yet the Barr summary, but seeing the report itself, Why does that matter? The current regulations, not statute, the current regulations lay out this process that says, well, the Department of Justice provides a summary. Why is it important to see the full report?
For two reasons. Let's take both the obstruction case and the collusion case. Let me start with the collusion or conspiracy issue. I take at face value Bob Mueller's conclusion that there is not enough evidence to prosecute Trump or people in his campaign for a criminal conspiracy with Russia. But that doesn't mean there may not be a lot of evidence about inappropriate conduct. And the country deserves to know whether the Trump administration had contact with the Russians and what the nature of that contact was. And it may be ethically inappropriate or certainly something that we want to prevent future campaigns from doing, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a criminal conspiracy. So out of transparency, we need to know exactly what happened, and that's one of the reasons to have the report out. Second, on the obstruction issue, Mueller explicitly refuses to take a position. My guess is, and obviously it's an educated guess because I haven't seen the report, is that's because the Mueller found significant evidence of a possible crime. And he didn't want to be the one making the determination of whether the president committed a crime or not, because he thought that was a determination for Congress to make. So we need to see that evidence of the report, and then we need to look at constitutional scholars and get their input on whether they think that constitutes a crime or not. It's certainly not for Bill Barr to make that determination.
Who did you think, or who do you think Bob Mueller thought should be making that determination? You had said, well, nobody asked Bill Barr to weigh in. Well, I suspect the president asked Bill Barr to weigh in, at least implicitly upon hiring him. But but if Bob Mueller, and I offered my own thoughts and on air as soon as Bob Mueller was appointed, I didn't expect Bob Mueller to be the kind of person. I think there's been more lionization of him that was merited, at least for people who really wanted somebody to dig into the president. I saw somebody who seemed to be of the infrastructure, of the apparatus, of the power structure, not necessarily somebody who wants to disrupt that power structure. But who do you think Bob Mueller thought should be making the determination of whether or not to indict the president? Because if he thought it was supposed to be Bill Barr, wouldn't he know what Bill Barr would say?
You're absolutely right. That's one of the best points. I've been talking to pundits and journalists all day, and no one has made that point, that if he really thought it would be Bill Barr, he could have just consulted Bill Barr or Rosenstein, who he had to report to, and he could have put that conclusion in his report. The fact that he didn't put that conclusion in his report means that he didn't think that just going to the Justice Department was sufficient. He thought this is a constitutional question. Bob Mueller, by temperament, is a conservative person, not conservative in ideology, just conservative about the role of a prosecutor. He plays it straight. Unfortunately, that type of personality is up against street fighters and people who have no regard for the rules. So what Mueller thought he was doing is being humble and nuanced and submitting this evidence so that there could be a deliberative process in Congress. And I don't think he foresaw that Barr will basically hijack that process and issue his own interpretation. This is why, frankly, we need Bob Mueller to come before Congress to explain exactly what he was thinking.
And I'll offer another that I haven't heard anybody. And the reason I appreciate your time so much, one of the reasons I appreciate your time so much, is that we're right now in the throes of the early analysis. And that early analysis, I hope there will be more. But so often when I listen to the New York Times commentators, for instance, they say, oh, well, history will judge. I don't know. We kind of move on and forget. I don't remember what the heck happened in Iran-Contra. I just remember some people got away with some stuff and some people didn't. And I know that some of the people who testified or now have national radio shows. I don't know.
Thanks to Bill Barr, of course.
Exactly.
Convinced Bush to part. It's amazing how these figures just are perpetual, right? Like John Bolton comes around and just stays around to kill every constructive foreign policy issue and get us into wars. And Bill Barr just stays around decade after decade to get Republicans out of trouble. I mean, it's really, you couldn't write a novel that's this believable.
And here's the other, so first of all, amen. Second of all, here's the other point that I haven't heard somebody make. And this is, it gets to and I want to get sort of your take on it. We can be legal nerds for a moment. as I'm imagining, I was a law clerk back in the day. I'm imagining writing a memo like this, right? And there were these two arguments. And Bill Barr's argument was essentially, well, because there was no conspiracy, there can be no obstruction, because it goes to intent and it shows, well, why would you intend to obstruct justice over something you weren't guilty of in the first place? But the reason I want to see the report is because the conspiracy, if the reason that there is, quote, no conspiracy, in fact, what that means is no chargeable conspiracy, the reason there might not be chargeable conspiracy is, in fact, because of obstruction of justice. In fact, the first might not beget the second, the first might go the exact opposite direction on the second. Oh, we lost Rokana. Can we get Rokana back? We're going to Free Speech TV in just a moment. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I am Jeff. I don't think I just blew away Rokana with my analysis. But we'll be back in just a little bit on the Thom Hartmann Show. Thank you so much for your calls. The call-in number is 202-808-9925. And we finish with the congressman. We'll be getting to those calls. It is just the day after Bill Barr issued his letter. We'll be right back here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Thank you so much for listening to the show.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be right back. We're back on with Congressman Rokana. I missed you. I lost you for a second there. I'm not sure if you heard my point, but I'd actually like to get to that at the end. What else stood out to you from the, I mean, it's just the 4-page letter. Were you surprised that Bill Barr came out to be able to beat the Monday news cycles, or is that what would you have scripted if you were writing what Bill Barr would be likely to do?
You know, I did. It doesn't surprise me. The president is so much about the news cycle and putting out his spin. And the fact that they use the weekend to try to shape the narrative is a predictable political strategy, and it's one that we can't let them get away with.
The thing I was attempting to say when you got so rudely interrupted was that the obstruction charge could in fact be linked to the conspiracy charge, but in the opposite way that Bill Barr made the case that it did. He was sort of saying, well, there's no obstruction because there was no conspiracy. But if we were able to read the report and we said, well, there's no charge of conspiracy because we weren't able to get the evidence, and one of the reasons we weren't able to get the evidence is because the following witnesses lied, and they may have lied because the president told them that he had demonstrated that his punishment of people that went against him. That's one of the reasons I want to see it. What is the, feel free to comment on that, or what are you hearing from other members of Congress in terms of the appetite to get the report? And Republicans still have an appetite to get the report now that the Barr letter has been written.
No, that's really smart. I mean, one of the reasons that there may not be enough evidence of a criminal conspiracy is because the president intervened and obstructed justice. And that may, as you point out, be one of the reasons that Mueller couldn't prove the case of coordination. And this is something that's so important for us to convey. It's not that Mueller found that there's no misconduct. It's that he said that there's not enough evidence to prosecute a criminal case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's a very, very high bar. I also think that when it comes to the obstruction matter, it's important for us to really understand all of the evidence of what the president may have done, and to understand that people are prosecuted all the time, like Martha Stewart, for obstruction, even if they aren't prosecuted for the underlying crime. Consider this. Someone goes and accuses you of murder, and let's say you didn't kill someone, but you decide to go and intimidate people and say, you know what, I need you to lie on my behalf. I need you to go make sure that you're harassing the jurors. Of course, you're still going to be prosecuted for disrupting the process, even if you may not have killed someone. So the letter, from a logical perspective, makes no sense.
What do you see as the Republican appetite right now? You know, there was this vote that presumably you participated in to ask for the full release. Every Republican who voted asked likewise. Are they still asking, or are they now? Or do you expect them to say, no, that was a show vote. We don't really want the report?
Yeah, they're hoping, as they always have, that they can cast these votes for their own electoral benefit, and then have someone else do the dirty work. In this case, Bill Barr. So I think what the president said is go vote, make the appearance that we want this transparent, and then let our legal folks at Justice worry about not having the details leak. And it's a very cynical strategy.
We're going to be back in just a second, and Congressman might want to ask us to repeat those quick points when we get back to the national radio audience. We've been on Free Speech TV, and thanks, folks, for watching. Stay with us. We're here on the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jeff, and we are here with Congressman Ro Khanna, himself a law nerd. I say that as a not as a scarlet letter, but as a red badge of courage. It is nice to have you, Congressman.
Thank you for having me on, and I've enjoyed this conversation and your insights.
So I want to get back to two things that we were talking about off air for a moment. One was the possible connection between that Barr's argument is, well, no obstruction because no conspiracy. But if instead we read the Mueller report and it doesn't say a conclusion of no conspiracy, but it says, well, we looked at a bunch of stuff and we don't have sufficient evidence to charge. And then one of the reasons we don't have sufficient evidence to charge is because witnesses may be lying, and witnesses may be hard to find, or witnesses may be dead, or witnesses may be scared because of something the president did, that would seem relevant. You had a comment on that. I want to invite you to offer that comment back on the air.
Well, I think that's very astute. I mean, what could have happened here is that the president's obstruction, the president's intimidation, the president offering pardons, potential pardons, scared people off and didn't allow Mueller to make the case on coordination or collusion. Mueller didn't say that the president or the Trump campaign had no improper conduct. We don't know. There may have been improper conduct. All he said is he doesn't have the sufficient evidence to make a criminal case beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's very possible, as you suggest, one of the reasons he doesn't have that much evidence is because of the obstruction. And this is why we need Bob Mueller to testify. And it's also really important for people to know that in the real world, there are tons of prosecutions for obstruction of justice, even if the underlying crime isn't proved. Just ask Martha Stewart or many others who have faced that kind of prosecution.
And the other thing I wanted to get your thoughts on were either anything you witnessed of your Republican colleagues in the House who voted for the release of the Mueller report. Do you see that call continuing from Republicans? Do you see Republicans in the Senate piling on and saying, yes, we do want to see the Mueller report? Or do you see now the Senate shielding it and now hiding behind the Bill Barr 4-page letter?
I think they did that vote for show. I think the president said, be for transparency. Everyone understands that even 80% of Fox News viewers, I think, wanted the Mueller report public, and they're going to allow Bill Barr to do the dirty work, to claim falsely executive privilege, to try to hide as much of the report as he possibly can. And this is so they can campaign on transparency, but have the administration still not be transparent.
What reflections have you had, and maybe it's not quite time for full reflections, but on the back and forth between having special counsel regulations versus an independent counsel statute? We got the question earlier today, well, why wasn't there an independent counsel? Why wasn't this like Ken Starr? And Mueller is very different. Mueller is very decidedly not a Ken Starr of the left. But why was there, and explain, well, because the independent counsel statute sunsetted. How are you feeling about the current set of regulations and whether we need to go back to an independent counsel statute, or it's just sort of picking, we're navigating betwixt Scylla and Charybdis and the ship is doomed perhaps no matter which we go?
You know, here's the challenge. You know, in law school, they always say don't make law based on bad facts. And the problem is we've got really bad facts. We've got a president who has no regard for the law, no regard for tradition, no regard for any norms. And so this is why you have, in this case, I wish we had an independent counsel, because you would not have the type of cronyism and political manipulation that you see in the administration. Now, my hope is that Donald Trump, when it comes to a total violation of constitutional principles, is an abnormality, and that we are not going into an era where we are electing presidents who just continue to flout the rule of law. But if this type of pattern of behavior continues, I think this country is going to have no choice but to reinstitute the independent counsel.
And what do you think happens now? What do you think the House does? If the Senate doesn't pull for the report, what do you imagine Jerry Nadler doing? Tell us kind of what you think steps going forward.
I think there are three things. First, we need to continue to push for the public release of the report. And the talking points that this is classified information or evidence to a grand jury, no Democrat is talking about that. We don't expect classified information to be released. We don't expect evidence that was formally presented to a grand jury. I think you release the rest of it, and that's going to be probably 80 to 90% of the report and the documentation. So that's the first step. Second, let's have Bob Mueller testify. Instead of speculating what Mueller was thinking and why he didn't draw conclusions and whether he thought there was sufficient evidence for a criminal charge or not and his reasoning, let's just have him explain that directly to the American public. The investigation is done. His speaking will not compromise anything. Why didn't he ask the president to testify? What was he thinking? So we need Mueller. And third, now we need the Attorney General. I mean, under what authority was he making these conclusions? Had he had a conversation with Mueller prior to making these conclusions about whether he thought this rose to a crime? What did he think Mueller wanted in terms of the evidence? And what is his motivation in doing it within 48 hours?
And I did want to get to that, the president not testifying. It seemed, I thought there was going to be a constitutional fight. I thought that I thought that the most recent Supreme Court appointment and confirmation might even bear upon it. That I thought there was going to be a tug and pull about whether the president could be compelled to testify. And surprised that that didn't happen. Surprised that there was not apparently a compulsion to testify. What do you make of that?
You know, look, I think Bob Mueller actually is a real patriot, but he's sort of the person who was a hall monitor in elementary school and a valedictorian in high school, and he's going up against the schoolyard bully, and the problem is that the bully doesn't follow the rules. So Mueller's approach works in a normal political environment, in a normal time where he is someone conscientious and grew up believing in a certain set of norms and values and is a rule follower. And I think that's why he was modest and careful in his approach. But the president exploited that, and the president looked for every loophole.
Ro Khanna, thank you so much for joining us. This is Tom's show.
I'm
Jeff.
Having me.
Appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We're going to be back with more good stuff right after this.
For our book club today, we're reading from a book by Elizabeth Holtzman, one of the former U.S. congresswomen who sat on the committee that considered impeaching Richard Nixon. And this book is titled The Case for Impeaching Trump. Just came out. This is from the first chapter titled Impeachment. When Donald Trump's presidential election victory was announced in the early morning hours of November 9, 2016, like many Americans, I rubbed my eyes in disbelief and dismay. Two questions raced through my mind. What had become of America that a man so unfit, so small-minded, so mean-spirited could be elected? A man whose ethnic and racial bigotry had set the stage for his presidential run when he called Mexicans rapists and made racist birther attacks on President Barack Obama, whose vulgarity and misogyny were laid bare in the Access Hollywood tape when he bragged about forcibly grabbing women by their genitals, whose performance at presidential debates showed him not only flagrantly ill-informed, but manifestly unwilling to get informed? My second question was about how much harm this man would do to America as its 45th president. I have my answer now to the latter, less than 2 years after the election. President Trump has damaged American democracy far more than I would have guessed. He has refused to protect our system of free elections from foreign interference. He has relentlessly attacked the administration of justice, in particular the investigation into a possible conspiracy with Russia regarding the 2016 presidential election, putting himself above the rule of law. He has failed to separate his personal business from the country's, flaunting the Constitution's requirements. And he has violated the constitutional rights of the people in separating children from parents at the southwest border without due process of law. And to cover up these misdeeds, he has systematically lied to and assailed the press. These are great and dangerous offenses that the framers of our Constitution wanted to counteract and thwart. They provided a powerful remedy: impeachment. Many tremble at the word, fearing how President Trump's supporters will react to an impeachment inquiry, worrying that it will only further polarize an already deeply divided nation, or that there will not be enough votes in the Senate to convict him if the House of Representatives votes to impeach. Just calling for an inquiry will be viewed as a Democratic Party attack on the head of another party, a kind of coup d'etat. It's easy to find reasons to be anxious, but I'm not afraid. As a junior congresswoman, the youngest ever elected at that time, I served on the House Judiciary Committee that voted to impeach President Richard Nixon for the high crimes and misdemeanors he committed in connection with the Watergate cover-up and other matters. Through thorough, fair, and above all bipartisan, the committee acted on solid evidence presented in televised hearings that riveted the nation, handing us the blueprint for how impeachment can be successfully pursued today. In our 225 years of constitutional democracy, the Nixon impeachment process has been proven to be the only presidential effort that worked. Though Nixon resigned, the only president ever to do so, 2 weeks after the committee's impeachment vote, he did so to avoid the certainty of being impeached and removed from office. We became a better nation for having held the president accountable. All of which raises two further questions. Should we be considering the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump? Will we again become a better nation by pursuing that option? To answer, we need to set aside President Trump's unremitting attacks on the environment, on our close allies, on the Affordable Care Act, and any disagreements we have over policy, as well as any personal animus, and simply ascertain whether he has engaged in the kind of egregious conduct that would meet the constitutional standards for impeachment and removal from office. This means we have to focus sharply on his potentially impeachable offenses. In doing so, we will find it useful to compare them, when possible, to similar offenses by President Nixon, found to be impeachable by the House Judiciary Committee in 1974. Here's a list of some of President Trump's potentially impeachable offenses developed as of this writing. A possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. On May 9, 2017, Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, who is investigating both his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and Russia's connections to the Trump campaign in connection with influencing the 2016 presidential election. 2 days later, President Trump admitted to NBC's Lester Holt that Comey's firing had to do with that, quote, Russia thing. In other words, President Trump acknowledged that he was trying to shut down the FBI investigation into his own possible conspiracy with Russia. Flynn has since pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. The Comey firing uncannily echoes Nixon's firing of the special Watergate prosecutor for seeking highly damaging information about that president, a brazen defiance of the rule of law that triggered the start of impeachment proceedings against Nixon. A second possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. President Trump has persistently and publicly attacked those heading the Russia investigation, including Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and has repeatedly condemned Attorney General Jeff Sessions for recusing himself, suggesting that he wants to fire any and all of them in order to get control of the Russian investigation. He actually did give an order to fire Mueller. A failure to care that the laws are faithfully executed is required by the Constitution. To try to deflect public concern about his possible role, well, it continues from there. The case for impeaching Trump by Elizabeth Holtzman.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Happy Monday, everybody. We're back. I'm Jeff. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. And you, as you know, are you. We are talking about the Bill Barr letter. Not because the Mueller investigation is the most important thing going on. In fact, I think its importance has been overstated. I think we have overstated the likelihood, and by we I mean the overall discussion. I have tried to cut against that at least a little bit. I think we've overstated the likelihood that it was going to meaningfully disrupt this presidency. And I think even if it had disrupted this presidency, I think we would be overstating the importance that that would have in figuring out how we can, in fact, do the big three that I care about, which is save democracy, save the middle class, and save the planet. Let's go to your calls. You've been waiting patiently, and thank you so much for doing so. Mark from San Diego wins the Most Patient Listener Award this hour. Go ahead, Mark.
Not a problem. I'm enjoying the show, listening to it. Boy, this thing stinks to high heaven. They have shaped the narrative for sure with the help of some lazy journalists. I mean, you wake up to the headlines today, and the New York Times, there's a big cloud has been lifted over the Trump presidency. Why? Because the guy he appointed said so? I just get so tired of this lazy journalism. It just plays right into the hands of Trump, who's able to shape the narrative. And the one thing I haven't heard anybody bring up is why did Michael Flynn get such a sweetheart deal if his testimony wasn't going to amount to anything? I don't get the whole thing doesn't make any sense to me.
The Michael Flynn thing is interesting because to me, like that was, as I understand what happened to Michael Flynn, is he got paid to change foreign policy. He got paid to do something for a foreign government that was opposed to what our government had said was in our best interest. That seems really close to how I would define treason, unless one thinks that treason is something that only happens in U.S. wartime, but it was related to military conflict. It is surprising. I am also befuddled by the Flynn thing. I don't know what to make of it.
Even the judge in his case said that, are you sure you don't want to bring this guy up on treason? I mean, how could you spend 2 years interviewing all these witnesses? I mean, like Bill Maher says, I don't need to see the Mueller report. I have a TV. I mean, you can see the obstruction in plain view.
Yeah.
How could there be no obstruction? I mean, it's just, I don't think they're going to get away with it. The American people I think that, it was a good try, and they've done well shaping the narrative because, you know how lazy Americans are. They're going to see the headline and assume that the Mueller report is out when the Mueller report is not out. But they're able to shape the narrative. But I think that's going to last for a week or so. And I just don't think they're going to keep the lid on this boiling pot. I really don't think so. I think it's going to come out. Thank God the Democrats have control of Congress because I think that's where it's going to come out in the democratically controlled Congress.
And Mark, thank you so much for calling. And yeah, and when you say keep the lid on the boiling pot, to me it depends on what the boiling pot is. If the boiling pot is about a certain set of facts with respect to a certain number of people, with respect to the Trump administration, Donald Trump himself, that's one question. If it is the boiling pot of democracy being subverted generally and specifically, that is the pot that I hope will boil and boil further. And that for those who think this whole thing has been a big distraction, that to me is what it is either a distraction from or a spotlight on. And that's where I hope the energy will be. I have more thoughts about that. I'll offer those thoughts a little bit later in the show. But thank you so much for calling, Mark. Corky, Rochester, New York, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a criminal organization. How are you going to bring it down unless you start acting the way they act? I mean, this is John Gotti on steroids. Teflon's on, nothing sticks.
I have said, to me, we'll see what sticks. I think that there are investigations about the Trump apparatus, the Trump administration, or the Trump family, businesses, etc. And there are those who think the indictments will come after he leaves the White House because the Trump administration's Department of Justice will shield Donald Trump. I wanted to say something about Mark's call as well. That I do. I haven't yet constructed all of the rhetorical architecture for what I'm about to say, but I'll offer it here in a somewhat nascent state. And that is, it's not that I think that Mueller was there to protect the president. That's not what I think. I think Bill Barr, that's a different matter. But that's not my feeling about Robert Mueller. And I also think about the New York Times. The New York Times, who, as one of our callers just said, seems to be so quick to adopting the narrative, at least their headline writers, and saying, "Oh, lifts a cloud over the Trump administration." I do think not having Mueller investigate further, not having him call more witnesses, it's now very clear that Bob Mueller will not interview Donald Trump. Donald Trump won't have to be there under oath answering questions. I guess that does lift a big cloud. So I don't want to overstate my critique. But let's be clear, if it weren't for the New York Times, Donald Trump wouldn't be president. If it weren't for the FBI, Donald Trump wouldn't be president. Hillary Clinton would be president. And I suspect Democrats would have lost a bunch of seats in Congress because that's probably what would have happened. But there is this sense, and I even go back to Al Gore quickly standing down and not challenging the Supreme Court ruling with respect to Florida, with respect to his election and George W. Bush's election. And that is, there are people in power who are believing in institutions and believing in the power structure. Ken Starr is a little different. Ken Starr was an activist. Ken Starr used the position he had to try to take down a president. Ended up going from an investigation on a land deal to an investigation around an extramarital affair. And went not only where the evidence would lead, where the evidence might lead to other evidence that might lead to something else that might lead to something that would be embarrassing for the president and might take down the president. That's what he viewed as his duty and opportunity. Robert Mueller, this occurred to me when we were talking to Ro Khanna, Robert Mueller, under an independent counsel statute, might have been the ideal person. If he had had the power to decide indictment, if he had been truly independent and totally shielded from the president's appointed attorney general, Mueller might have been the guy. And oddly, Ken Starr might be the kind of person you'd want if you were in a special counsel, because you'd have to get through all those other filters. But instead what we had was Ken Starr, who went further than anyone would anticipate, and Mueller, who left it up to the Trump administration about whether or not they wanted to indict the Trump administration. That's sort of surprising. But to me, the big thing, I hope the big takeaway that I haven't yet constructed all the words for, is this idea that institutions, the infrastructure, the apparatus, the power structure will in fact police itself sufficiently. And I don't think that's what's happening. I think that there are people who, and I think more of them are in high ranks who are Democrats than Republicans, frankly, who are trusting the institutions, who think the institutions are themselves the thing that will be our salvation, not recognizing that movements will have to resolve some of these questions. The institutions are not there to protect us from climate change. There's not an institution that can do that yet. Institutions are not right now protecting democracy itself. In fact, institutions are being used to subvert it. Institutions are not there right now to protect the middle class, to keep us from having the biggest wealth disparities we've had in 100 years. In fact, institutions are being used to exacerbate that. That we can't merely rely. This is not the 1970s. This is not the post-World War II era. This is not the time after we just defeated the Nazis and we are together and recognizing that we have to fight fascism, and at least we are united around that. It's a different time, and we have to approach our media differently. I will step off my soapbox in order to listen to Denny. Go ahead, Denny from Pine Top.
Hi, Jefferson. Good stuff. I love your clear, factual, concise delivery. Nice break from Tom as well. Listen, I went from very blue Flint to bright red Arizona. Briefly, 30% disabled vet agent orange. Army paratrooper. Look, okay, filters, deflection, fake news, deflection for 2 years at least. The old story, fake news is better than no news. Media domination of the news cycle. I mean, this is as good as an online law school. It makes the average guy out here, modern day soap opera. I mean, the average guy, we're trying to keep a job, raise a family, and it's a very good, the news cycle, good bottom line for the Murdochs and the news organizations out there, and it's almost their goal to perpetuate this. I mean, which is proportionately also very good for free speech TV and others. And all this falls eventually, partially, on the steps of the FCC. And the puzzle is, how do we manage the right to free speech? Here's my question. Whatever happened to Michael Avenatti? He claimed he could get Trump under oath, easily get him perjured on tape, and then follows obstruction and follows intimidation, and of course the Senate will fail to indict on this call for impeachment, but at least we didn't waste 2 years, and in 2020 we have a great chance to get to the White House. Your thoughts?
Well, Michael Avenatti just got arrested for an attempted, alleged extortion attempt against Nike. We may talk more about that. I do have some thoughts about Avenatti. We're going to go to break right now. Denny, thank you so much for calling, and I'll be offering a bunch of thoughts as we go forward. We'll be back. This is The Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be right back. We're on the Thom Hartmann Show here on Free Speech TV. Thank you so much for watching. Ziggy from Cooperstown, New York. Are you a member of the Hall of Fame or only a frequent visitor?
Only a frequent visitor.
All right. What's on your mind?
I want to talk about obstruction. I think that Trump's tweets about Mueller were obstruction of justice. Therefore, Mueller may have determined that he couldn't be an independent arbitrator and essentially recused himself.
So let me make sure I'm understanding your argument. Because Donald Trump threatened Mueller, that Mueller said, I am now compromised. And therefore, if I were to make the final determination on this, people would think it was because I was compromised, either because I was scared of indicting him or because I was engaging in backlash for indicting him, and therefore somebody else needs to make this decision. And therefore, by saying, hey, somebody else pick, that was why you say that was tantamount to recusal.
That's right. That's why you're the attorney.
So it's an interesting argument, an interesting take. I hadn't thought of it that way. Here is, and that could be either explicitly or at least implicitly why he did that. It's like, oh well, geez, I am so the subject of discussion that somebody else has got to weigh in. The challenge is there was no one else, and one of the reasons I wish that Mueller hadn't been so close-lipped with the media in some respects.
Yeah. No matter how much you want to make not you, but people want to make Mueller into a robot, he's still a human being.
Right.
And if he had been doing that stuff to me, I would take it a little personally. I don't know about you.
Sure. And then the question is, well, what does he do about it? Because by leaving it up to the person that Trump handpicked to make the decision, Trump didn't make that decision because Trump's primary objective is, well, if I'm guilty, I ought to go to jail. That's not Trump's not thinking about like, well, I just want someone fair. I just want someone who will really evaluate the facts and the law and do what's right. That's not how Trump's picking that person. That's not how he picked Whitaker. That's not why he was mad at Sessions. And that's not why he picked Barr. Well, let's go where the facts lead. That's not what the interview was about. That's not how he was vetting this guy. That's not why he picked the guy that got the Bushes off.
Right. I agree with you 100%. And Jefferson, I always like it when you're on filling in for Tom. Thank you.
Hey, Zig, I appreciate it. Appreciate you listening. We always like it when you listen.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. I want to talk to Mark, who's listening on xray.fm, home station. Thanks, Mark. Go ahead.
Hey, you're welcome. Hey, your last 2 or 3 callers, I think, have been hitting the nail on the head, and I think the real conspiracy, I want to talk about a paradox next, but the real conspiracy seems to be between the Trump administration and the media. That's what I think the conspiracy is, building this thing up.
They're gonna take us to break. Mark, they're gonna take us to break in just a second. But let me say that I think what you just said, if we were gonna offer hypotheses, and I want to offer hypotheses, not conclusions. We should only base conclusions upon facts. But in order to explore, we can offer hypotheses. I think your hypothesis of the Trump's connection to the media, I think that's one of the most important things. And we already know what happened with the Inquirer. At least we know some of it. We already know what's happened with some reporters. We already know that there looked to be compromise among some reporters. And by the way, some of them no longer have jobs. I think this is one of the biggest undertold stories. And who are we relying upon to tell us those stories? Mark, we'll be back in just a moment. This is Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Off air, we had a chance to hear from Mark, and Mark's comment was, I think there needs to be more analysis of the connection between Donald Trump, he used the word conspiracy, and the media. And my response was and is that, well, I want to be very careful about drawing conclusions without facts. We can start with hypotheses and then evaluate facts to test those hypotheses. That's how you do science. That's how I think you try to wrestle with facts. That's how you draw conclusions. And what we already know about Donald Trump's relationship to leading journalists, what we already know with his willingness to, with the National Enquirer and their willingness to threaten members of the media, came out more publicly when that threat was made clear to Jeff Bezos, that this is one of the big stories. This is, I think, a bigger story as to whether there was ever going to be a tape of Vladimir Putin himself and Donald Trump himself saying, hey, you want to go steal an election? Because I don't think that tape ever happened. And if that tape ever happened, I think it got destroyed. But I think that something that is a major story that bears upon more than a single election is, what are the relationships with the media? And is it merely the old line of that was offered by the then head of NBC, who is no longer the head of NBC, related a little bit to some of the stuff I was just saying, who said, Donald Trump might be bad for the country, but he's good for NBC. That's been the sort of cover story. But is there more to it than that? I think that's a big one. Let's set that aside for a moment so we can talk to our friend Bob Ney, Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. Bob Ney, how you doing?
Hi, how are you, Jefferson?
I am well. Are you relieved? Are you thrilled? Are you disappointed? Are you still curious? How are you feeling today?
On the report?
Yeah.
Oh, it's not my job to have emotion about it, just to analyze it.
I'm sure you have no emotions about it. What is your analysis?
My analysis is that, obviously the president wins on the no collusion. I mean, it can be, twisted or turned, or people can, hate him or whatever, but on the no collusion part, he wins on that. And on the second part, of course, it's a draw and a wash, and that's going to be open for interpretation because, of the fact that you've got the Attorney General saying, well, he wasn't exonerated, but he wasn't charged or found to be of criminal intent. So that is going to be the argument area, obviously, I think, on this, because the no collusion part, would be tough to go against Mueller on that. But the other seems to be open-ended, and two members of the House, Congressman Jerry Connolly and Ro Khanna, have said they want Mueller there to testify, which I have to assume, in looking at all this, is going to be the next step, because why would Mueller not come testify? And he most likely should testify and be asked questions. Now, Barr, also the Attorney General, but more important, I think, would be also Mueller, because, he's the one that had the attorneys and the FBI and the report and the witnesses and the subpoenas, et cetera. You're more of a legal eagle than I am, but some of the calls for releasing grand jury information is going to be virtually impossible, because it would have to sift through things that either were not relevant at the end of the day, or otherwise there would be a preoccupation, I think, by some of the corporate media on that, and also people, to protect them in, some of the witnesses. So reports could be released, but some of the people calling for the grand jury information, that would be I think would be a huge legal battle. It would be interesting, but I think a large legal battle.
Yeah, that's real hard, because that's real hard even beyond the claim. Somebody else had asked, well, will they subpoena Barr? And there may be a claim of executive privilege. But yeah, getting to grand jury testimony goes beyond just executive privilege. That is tricky. But yeah, it seems to me that they'll get that Mueller has got to say something, because there's at least this, and maybe this is me lobbying you, but one of the things that's driven me nuts in the coverage, and what's driven me nuts in the analysis, is that people haven't connected the dots very strongly between Bill Barr's arguments and the so obvious flip. And for listeners who were listening in the first hour, forgive me, I know this is a repeat, or you're welcome. That Barr's argument essentially, well, no conspiracy, and therefore no obstruction, because why would you obstruct something that hadn't happened?
I would view those as two completely separate issues, because now President Trump has called, I forget what the exact words were, but basically Mueller is okay because he made his decision. If Trump would have known this, he probably would have praised Mueller instead of 157 different tweets condemning him. But I think there's completely two different decisions here. One is the collusion of someone directly in the campaign or the president himself with Russia. Obviously, the report shows that Russia did interfere in the campaign. But then the second part is obstruction, which is a whole different issue. But I understand, when some people make that logical conclusion, like you were just talking about, it's not logical for them to say, well, automatically no obstruction, because the conclusion didn't come out the other direction. Yeah,
we talked to Ro Khanna, and he said, yeah, remember Martha Stewart? She went after, they got her for obstruction, even if they didn't get her for the underlying crime. And I get that, and I hear what you say, that they're separate things, and that is a very legitimate view. I'm arguing an additional view, that they in fact are linked, but 180 degrees differently than Bill Barr suggests they're linked. And let me explain. That what he is saying is, well, because there's no conspiracy, there's no obstruction. I think there is at least as strong an argument that is the flip side of that, that perhaps the reason it is hard to convict, hard to charge, there's insufficient evidence to charge on conspiracy, is because of obstruction. That's why the obstruction is so important. It is a relatively specious argument to suggest that, well, if they couldn't prove if they couldn't prove conspiracy, it's obvious there was no obstruction. Actually, maybe the reason they can't charge conspiracy is because of the obstruction.
Right. And also, no matter what the conclusion would be in the report, any attempt along the way to influence people or events can be obstruction, as you know, in itself.
Well, what are you going to do with yourself now that there's no more Mueller report to talk about? I guess it'll be a gift that keeps on giving for a little while.
To work for a living and research thing.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe we can get to the fundamental issues that are impacting our democracy. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Bob Ney, Talk Media News, talkmedia.com. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. I'm a guest.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you, and it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff, and you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. For our book today, we're reading from Elon Papp's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. This is from the preface. It's titled The Red House. The Red House was a typical early Tel Avivian building, the pride of the Jewish builders and craftsmen who toiled over in the 1920s. It had been designed to house the head office of the local Workers' Council. It remained such until toward the end of 1947 it became the headquarters of the Haganah, the main Zionist underground militia in Palestine. Located near the sea on Yarkon Street in the northern part of Tel Aviv, the building formed another fine addition to the first Hebrew city in the Mediterranean, the White City, as its literati and pundits affectionately called it. For in those days, unlike today, the immaculate whiteness of his houses still bathed the town as a whole in the opulent brightness so typical of Mediterranean port cities of that era and that region. It was a sight for sore eyes, elegantly fusing Bauhaus motifs with native Palestinian architecture in an admixture that was called Levantine, in the least derogatory sense of the term. Such too was the Red House, its simple rectangular features graced with frontal arches that framed the entrance and supported the balconies of its two upper stories. It was either its association with the workers' movement that had inspired the adjective red, or its pinkish tinge that it acquired during sunset that had given the house its name. The former was more fitting, as the building continued to be associated with the Zionist version of socialism when, in the 1970s, it became the main office for Israel's kibbutzim movement. Houses like this, important historical remnants of the mandatory period, prompted UNESCO in 2003 to designate Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. Today, the house is no longer there, a victim of development, which has razed this architectural relic to the ground to make room for a car park next to the new Sheraton Hotel. Thus, in this street, too, no traces left of the White City, which it has slowly transmogrified into the sprawling, polluted, extravagant metropolis that is the modern Tel Aviv. In this building on a cold Wednesday afternoon, 10 March 1948, a group of 11 men, veteran Zionist leaders, together with young military Jewish officers, put the final touches on a plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That same evening, military orders were dispatched to the units on the ground to prepare for the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from vast areas of the country. The orders came from a detailed description of the methods to be employed to forcibly evict the people: large-scale intimidation, laying siege to and bombarding villages and population centers, setting fire to homes, properties, goods, expulsion, demolition, and finally planting mines among the rubble to prevent any of the expelled inhabitants from returning. Each unit was issued with its own list of villages and neighborhoods as the targets of the master plan. Codenamed Plan D, Dalet in Hebrew, this was the fourth and final version of less substantial plans that outlined the fate the Zionists had in store for Palestine and consequently for its native population. The previous three schemes had articulated only obscurely how the Zionist leadership contemplated dealing with the presence of so many Palestinians living in the land that the Jewish national movement coveted as its own. This fourth and last blueprint spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. Quote, "The Palestinians have to go," end quote. In the words of one of the first historians to note the significance of that plan, Simcha Flapan, the military campaign against the Arabs, including the conquest and destruction of the rural areas, was set forth in the Haganah's Plan Dalet. The aim for the plan was, in fact, the destruction of both the rural and urban areas of Palestine. As the first chapters of this book will attempt to show, this plan was both the inevitable product of the Zionist ideological impulse to have an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine, and a response to developments on the ground once the British cabinet had decided to end the mandate. Clashes with local Palestinian militias provided the perfect context and pretext for implementing the ideological vision of an ethnically cleansed Palestine. The Zionist policy was first based on retaliation against Palestinian attacks in February of 1947, and it transformed into an initiative to ethnically cleanse the country as a whole in March of 1948. Once the decision was taken, it took 6 months to complete the mission. When it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800,000 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods had been emptied of their inhabitants. The plan decided upon on 10 March 1948, and above all, its systematic implementation in the following months, was a clear-cut case of ethnic cleansing operation regarded under international law today as a crime against humanity. After the Holocaust, it has become impossible to conceal large-scale crimes against humanity. Our modern communication-driven world, especially since the upsurge of electronic media, no longer allows human-made catastrophes to remain hidden from the public eye or to be denied. And yet one such crime has been erased almost totally from the global public memory: the disposition of the Palestinians in 1948 by Israel. This, the most formative element in the modern history of the land of Palestine, has ever since been systematically denied and is still today not recognized as an historical fact, let alone acknowledged as a crime that needs to be confronted politically as well as morally. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity, and the people who perpetrate it today are considered criminals to be brought before special tribunals. It may be difficult to decide how one ought to refer to or deal with in the legal sphere those who initiated and perpetrated ethnic cleansing in Palestine in 1948. But it's impossible to reconstruct their crimes. Anyhow, it continues the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
According to this headline in the New Republic, column, article, piece of writing offered by Marcy Wheeler, it says, yes, Trump obstructed justice, and William Barr is helping him to cover it up, end quote. We have Marcy Wheeler on the air right now. Marcy, hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you make I don't know if you were involved in the headline writing. The headline makes a bold claim. Say more.
Well, I didn't do the headline, but I'll back the headline. So what we know is that Mueller turned over his report to Attorney General Barr Friday afternoon. And last night we got a memo from Barr saying Mueller did not come to a conclusion about whether or not Trump obstructed justice or not. He specifically said it's not an exoneration. And without explaining why he did so, Barr said, well, I sat down with Rod Rosenstein and we've decided that there's not obstruction of justice. And important to that was his portrayal of what Mueller investigated. And Rosenstein was involved, so maybe this is accurate, but it's not entirely clear given what Mueller has shown thus far in his investigation. Because the memo yesterday only addresses whether the Trump campaign conspired with the Russian government to basically hack and leak Hillary's emails, or to do the trolling stuff. But the important thing is the hack and leak. It doesn't address, for example, whether the Trump campaign conspired with Russians to do so. It doesn't address whether the Trump campaign conspired with WikiLeaks to do so. And we know that Roger Stone is headed to trial on covering up that he did so. And that's important because in finding that Trump did not obstruct justice, Barr said, well, there was no underlying crime to obstruct. So therefore, he couldn't have obstructed justice, clean bill of health. And not only does that not make sense, does that not reflect the public record, but it also conflicts with what Barr said 3 times in his confirmation hearing under sworn testimony.
This is, You added something to, and I will offer it. I will offer it now as well. And this will probably be the last time. No, it won't be the last time this week. That to me, I would have welcomed this back in the day if we were going to do a moot court on this argument. I would have welcomed this as the opening salvo argument, because to me the pivot would have been much more powerful than the assertion. And his assertion, as you well stated, was, well, there's no attempt to try to block justice because there was no justice to block. There was no underlying crime. And your argument, my argument has been, well, actually, the converse could be true. Maybe the reason there was no chargeable conspiracy was because of obstruction of justice. You make another one. Well, maybe there was a different crime. Maybe, yeah, this quoted piece did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, end quote. Maybe the thing that happens before that capitalized T was, well, any number of crimes could have been committed, any kind of misconduct could have happened, any things could have been happened by other people other than members of the Russian government or the Trump campaign that were still allied with Trump. You make a powerful point, Marcy.
Well, and we actually, and I point this out in my piece, but we have at least one moment where we know for a fact that Trump's floating of pardons affected Mueller's ability to get to the underlying issue. And that's with Paul Manafort. So Paul Manafort supposedly cooperated with Mueller last September rather than going to trial. And in the process, he lied. He lied about a number of things. But one thing in particular that he lied about was a meeting on August 2nd, 2016, that he had with Konstantin Kilimnik, where he gave Kilimnik polling data, recent detailed polling data from the Trump campaign. And in the same conversation, the same meeting, they discussed a quote-unquote peace plan for Ukraine, which basically amounted to Russia getting everything it wanted, and also sanctions relief. And that's important. So he lied about it, and as they were litigating whether or not the lie was sufficiently important so as to find him in breach of his plea agreement, Andrew Weissman said quite clearly the reason that he believes Manafort lied on this point in particular is because he needed to do so in hopes of getting a pardon. So Trump floated him a pardon. Manafort refused to tell the truth about a key issue on whether he gave that polling data to Russia to help Trump win the election. And as a result, Mueller did not come to a conclusion, did not find evidence of whether or not the Trump campaign conspired with the Russian government. And by the way, Kilimnik, while he has ties, according to the FBI, to Russian intelligence, he's not the Russian government. So even there, the exonerations don't address this ongoing relationship with Konstantin Kilimnik. But that's a case where it's crystal clear that Trump's obstruction prevented Mueller from reaching the case.
So let me summarize. So there was evidence of a crime that Trump floated a pardon. After the floating of that pardon, the question is whether it's because of, but after the floating of that pardon, post hoc does not necessarily ergo propter hoc. Right. After the floating of the pardon, Manafort lies, and that prohibits, that prevents, that blocks an indictment on that charge. And you're saying, and you think you think that instance itself could have been sufficient to bring an obstruction charge.
Yeah, right. And I don't know, and I hope Attorney General Barr gets asked about this. I don't know whether he considered that unrelated to the question of conspiring with the Russian government because Mueller didn't reach that issue, or because Konstantin Kilimnik himself is not a member of the Russian government. Same thing with Natalia Veselnitskaya. She's not Russian government, but she clearly is somebody who was working with the Russian government at the time on a different legal case. So if the standard that Barr used to find a crime is whether Trump conspired with the Russian government, as opposed to Natalia Veselnitskaya, as opposed to Konstantin Kilimnik, as opposed to WikiLeaks, then we're not going to get there, because there was a cutout at every level of the operation. But we also know that at least in that instance, the Paul Manafort instance, Trump had floated a pardon. Manafort lied. that lie went to the heart. And this, the judge in the case, Amy Berman Jackson, was quite clear on the lie went to the heart of whether or not Mueller could answer the question, did Trump conspire with the Russians?
And this may just be a dumb question, but why do you think, what's most important to you about getting the report itself?
Well, there are lots of questions about what Barr did. It's not even clear that Mueller asked him to make a determination about whether Trump obstructed justice. Barr himself, in addition to testifying under oath 3 times that what Trump has already been known to do amounts to obstruction of justice, he also has said that if the president obstructs justice, the proper remedy for that, he doesn't say the proper remedy for that is for the Attorney General in 48 hours to review it and give him a clean bill of health. The proper remedy for that is impeachment. The proper remedy for that is to bump it over to the House Judiciary Committee and let them decide. That is the constitutional remedy, and that is what Bill Barr has said specifically in the context of this investigation. But all of a sudden, that statement went out the window over the weekend.
And that if he, well, I want to get back to it. I want to talk more about all of this stuff. Marcy Wheeler, your do we call it a column? What do we call it? Your written piece is in the New Republic right now. Thank you so much for being with us.
Sure.
We'll be back. This is Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. We're on with Marcy Wheeler. We'll be right back. Marcy, we're back with you. I'm Jeff. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Looking at your article and looking at the Barr letter, I have to say I'm a little frustrated. I may be more than a little bit frustrated about the media characterization of this. One that I'll give is the CNN headline, which says Barr: Mueller finds no Trump-Russia conspiracy. Forgive the mind-reading question. Why do you think that headline bothers me?
Go ahead and explain it, because I mean, it goes beyond what the letter says, but it does take some parsing to get to that.
Yeah, it does, because even the cherry-picked sentence, the single sentence that does the most work in the whole 4 pages, it starts with quote and then a T that was not capitalized in the original text. Yeah, a little bracket to make the T capitalized. That's the big question. What's before the T? What's before the T? Because the investigation did not establish, important word establish, that members of the Trump campaign, important word Trump campaign, conspired to coordinate with the Russian government, important word government, in its election interference activities. That does not preclude, if that sentence were true, it does not preclude any number of other sentences. It does not preclude a sentence that says the investigation did not suggest everything after that. It does not say the investigation did not establish that friends of Trump did not do everything that was just said. It does not say that did not establish members of the Trump campaign coordinated with people other than the Russian government, but just Russian other human beings. Or change that one out, or leave all that the same and establish, keep everything else the same, and instead of election interference activities, include other stuff, policy-making activities. So to lead from that, even just the established word, it does not say we have reviewed this and find no Trump-Russia conspiracy. That was not found. What he found was there was no chargeable crime. I know it might seem a small thing. To me, it seems big. Am I overstating the case?
No, I think you're stating it quite well. And it may well be the case that Barr's memo is a fair representation of what Mueller has done. But what comes before the T, right? It could say, Roger Stone, Don Jr., both did conspire with Russians, but they're not part of the Trump campaign, and I wasn't ordered to look into the son and the lifelong aide, political advisor. It may well say we found abundant evidence that the Trump campaign, that Trump engaged in a quid pro quo where they said, thanks for the help, we'll give you policy considerations if and when we win. That would be a conspiracy it's not covered in the two very narrowly described things that Barr addresses as far as the conspiracy, which amount only to the trolling and to the hack and leak. And the hack and leak is limited just to the Russian government. It doesn't it doesn't explicitly say this, but it very much does not include WikiLeaks, for example.
What do you think happens now, and what do you sort of hope happens now?
Well, I've given up hoping that...
Just given up hope generally, I understand.
You know, I would have liked us to get some closure, especially on Russia. Like, twice today, I've had to explain to people that this investigation did not start because of Christopher Steele. This investigation started because a crime was committed. A hostile foreign nation hacked both the Democrats and the Republicans. That's why the FBI started investigating it. They started investigating Trump because a Trump campaign aide found out the Democrats had been hacked before they had. And so, you know, we're not going to get any closure. I do suspect Congress is going to get very involved. I think Barr is going to testify. Mueller sounds like he's going to testify.
And Hull, we'll be right back with you in just a second.
Yep.
We're back on air with the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in. Thank you for doing that. You can call in, by the way, at 202-808-9925. You can also tweet at The Thom Hartmann Show. You can also tweet at me, Jefferson D. Smith. Thanks for everybody who is listening. Thank you also to Marcy Wheeler, whose column in the New Republic titled, "Yes, Trump Obstructed Justice, and William Barr is Helping Him Cover It Up." We're just wrapping that conversation now. Marcy, at the risk of, or more than the risk, at the cost of asking you to repeat some of what you were saying just off air, what do you think happens now? What should we be watching for?
Well, Congress is going to get involved.
Yeah.
They've already called Barr to testify. It sounds like Mueller will testify as well. It sounds like there's abundant, very damning evidence about what Trump did in here. And it sounds like what Mueller set up is a referral to the House Judiciary Committee because they are the one constitutionally empowered to determine whether or not the president broke the law. If you have a memo that says Trump can't be indicted, and DOJ does, then DOJ has absolutely no business weighing in on this. The House Judiciary Committee does.
Your view is essentially that Bill Barr is Robert Bork 2.0. That he's the guy that came in who was willing to do the protection of the president.
Yeah, and just yesterday I was saying we need to give him the benefit of the doubt. But as I keep saying, he testified under oath 3 times. He was asked, "Can the president issue pardons to get people not to testify against him?" Basically, I'm paraphrasing. And 3 times he said that would be a crime. And yet yesterday he decided that's not a crime somehow. And again, it seems like the way he got there was by so narrowly defining the crime that he believed Trump was trying to cover up that he somehow was able to give him this exoneration, which A, it's not his constitutional place to do, and B, he swore under oath 3 times that what Trump is known to have done is a crime. So I don't know how he got. I mean, I guess the only conclusion you can reach is that it was not an honest determination.
This gets me to a point that we haven't made yet, and might be tied for the most important question. Is it your assertion or your thought that what we know is criminal? There's 2 ways of critiquing this. I mean, one way of responding to this is, well, Bill Barr got it right, and thank goodness our 2-year national nightmare is over, and we can continue with the business of cutting taxes for the rich and melting the planet. That's one possible worldview. Another is that well, we don't know. We need to know what's in the report because we don't know what happened, and what we don't know might have been criminal. What you seem to be suggesting is something different, which is what we know is criminal, and what we need to figure out is a process to bring that to justice. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Well, even if it isn't criminal, right? And it may well be. You and I have talked about the other conspiracies that might come before that T in that sentence, right? Even if it isn't criminal, the standards by which presidents are judged are, according to DOJ that Bob Barr under oath says he still buys, the sitting president may not be indicted. The way to keep a president accountable, and this is for crimes and for abuse of office, is to impeach him. So according to what Bob Barr is on the record saying, the appropriate thing to do is for HJC to determine whether A, a crime has been committed, but B, whether Trump abused office in such a way that he should be impeached.
Because impeachment is different than a criminal standard. I just want to say thank you. What's a question I should have asked you that I didn't? What are you hoping that the media is covering better than they have done so far, either in the last 2 years or the last 24 hours?
I would hope that they would say, I mean, so 5 of Trump's close aides were indicted for lying. If you take what they admitted to lying about and you map it out, again, it lays out the other conspiracy you and I are talking about. And that has fallen by the wayside. Any discussion of what his aides lied to cover up and what any obstruction that Trump himself would be covering up points to a very different conspiracy, and I think we need to be talking about that as well.
So be clear about that. Say in clear terms the other conspiracy that you were suggesting is being covered up.
Several times during the campaign, Trump's people said to the Russians, or Trump's people were in a conversation where the Russians were offering dirt, were offering assistance, and Trump's campaign in response was saying, okay, we'll talk about sanctions relief.
Yep.
And then even before Trump took office, Mike Flynn was talking with the Russians about sanctions relief. So there's very much the look of a quid pro quo where Trump took the help in the campaign, maybe didn't help hack the computer, but took the help and in response tried to give Russia sanctions relief.
Yeah. Yeah, the analysis that I nodded my head at that seemed like the better was not that, yeah, there was some secret meeting, or there may have been, but that we're going to get some tape about, but that, you know, the Trump campaign, that Donald Trump's family left the door open. They didn't like go and loot the house with friends of Vladimir Putin. They just left the front door open, having some understanding that if they left the front door open, someone would come in and steal the stuff. And they left the front door open because these were their friends and they were in business together. But Marcy, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your coverage. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Take care. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. You've been oh so very patient. Let's take a quick call from Morris, KPFK. Nobody reads that fast, says Morris from Long Beach.
That is correct. If the brother got the report on Friday, I'm talking about Mr. Barr, and of course the library is closed at 5 o'clock on at least mine is on Saturday, and they're not open Sundays. But if he got the report on Friday, how is he going to be able to put that thing together enough to surmise, you know, to put together a summary on a Sunday? I mean, come on, let's keep it real. And quite frankly, we should remember that Mr. Mueller was a Republican appointee, and he had a very narrow thing to do, just like, remember Brett Kavanaugh? They took 24 hours to check him out. He had a very narrow thing to do here, right? It wasn't about justice or integrity. We should remember what Clarence Thomas said. A broken clock could be right twice a day. When he was speaking to the Heritage Foundation, he said, we have to remember that we are destroying our institution. And that's exactly what we got going on here. So we'll keep our eye on this, but remember that Barr was also against this special counsel thing anyway.
I agree, Morris. Thank you so much.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're going to be right back with the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
Our book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig. This is from the chapter, well, it starts with the chapter, A Life Edit, on page 4. I was scared. I couldn't not be. Being scared is what anxiety is all about. The bouts are coming closer and closer. I was worried where I was heading. It seemed there was no upper limit to despair. I tried to distract myself out of it. However, I knew from past experience alcohol was off limits, so I did the thing that had helped before to climb out of a hole, the thing I forget to do in my day-to-day life. I was careful about what I ate. I did yoga. I tried to meditate. I lay on the floor and placed my hand on my stomach and inhaled deeply, in, out, and noticed the stuttery rhythm of my breath. But everything was difficult. Even choosing what to wear in the morning made me cry. It didn't matter that I had felt like this before. A sore throat doesn't become less sore simply because you felt it before. I tried to read, but found it hard to concentrate. I listened to podcasts. I watched new Netflix shows. I went on social media. I tried to get on top of my work by replying to all my emails. I woke up and clasped my phone and prayed that whatever I could find there would take me out of myself. But, spoiler alert, it didn't work. I began to feel worse, and many of the distractions were doing nothing but driving me further to distraction. And T.S. Eliot's phrase from his 4 quartets, I was distracted from distraction by distraction. I would stare at an unanswered email with a feeling of dread and not be able to answer it. Then on Twitter, my go-to digital distraction of choice, I noticed my anxiety intensify. Even just passively scrolling my timeline felt like an exposure of a wound. I read news websites, another distraction, and my mind couldn't take it. The knowledge of so much suffering in the world didn't help put my pain in perspective. It just made me feel powerless and pathetic that my invisible woes were so paralyzing that when there were so many visible woes in the world. My despair intensified. So I decided to do something. I disconnected. I chose not to look at social media for a few days. I put an auto response on my emails too. I stopped watching or reading the news. I didn't watch TV. I didn't watch any music videos. Even magazines I avoided. During my initial breakdown years before, the bright imagery of magazines always used to linger and clog my mind with feverish racing images as I tried to sleep. I left my phone downstairs when I went to bed. I tried to get outside more. My bedside table was cluttered with a chaos of wires and technology and books I wasn't really reading. So I tidied up and took them away too. In the house, I tried to lie in darkness as much as possible, the way you might deal with a migraine. I had always, since I was first suicidally ill in my 20s, understood that getting better involved a kind of life edit, a taking away. As the minimalist advocate Fumio Sasaki put it, there's a happiness in having less. In the early days of my first experience of panic, the only things I had taken away were booze and cigarettes and strong coffees. Now, though, years later, I realized that a more general overload was the problem, a life overload, and certainly a technology overload. The only real technology I interacted with during this present recovery, aside from the car and the cooker, were yoga videos on YouTube, which I watched with the brightness turned low. The anxiety didn't miraculously disappear, of course not. Unlike my smartphone, there is no slide to power off function for anxiety. But I stopped feeling worse. I plateaued. And after a few days, things began to calm. The familiar path of recovery arrived sooner rather than later. And abstaining from stimulants, not just alcohol and caffeine, but these other things, was part of the process. I began, in short, to feel free again. Most people know the modern world can have physical effects, that despite advances, aspects of modern life are dangerous for our bodies. Car accidents, smoking, air pollution, a sofa-dwelling lifestyle, takeout pizza, radiation, that 4th glass of Merlot. Even being at a laptop can pose physical dangers. Sitting down all day, getting an RSI. Once I was even told by an optician that my eye infection and blocked tear ducts were caused by staring at the screen. We blink less, apparently, when working on a computer. So as physical health and mental health are intertwined, couldn't the same be said about the modern world and our mental states? Couldn't aspects of how we live in the modern world be responsible for how we feel in the modern world? Not just in terms of the stuff of modern life, but its values too. The values that cause us to want more than we have, to worship work above play, to compare the worst bits of ourselves with the best bits of other people, to feel like we always lack something. And as I grew better day by day, I began to have an idea about a book. This book right here. I've already written about my mental health and reasons to stay alive, but the question now was not why should I stay alive? The question this time was a broader one. How can we live in a mad world without ourselves going mad? As I began researching, I quickly found some attention-grabbing headlines for an attention-grabbing age. Of course, news is almost always designed to stress us out. If it was designed to keep us calm, it wouldn't be news, it would be yoga or a puppy. So there's an irony about news companies reporting on anxiety while also making us feel anxious. Anyway, here are some of the headlines. Stress and social media fuel mental health crisis among girls, from The Guardian. Chronic loneliness is a modern-day epidemic, from Forbes. Facebook may make you miserable, says Facebook, Sky News. Steep rise in self-harm among teenagers from the BBC. And on it goes. The book Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We're back. Happy Monday, or at least Monday. Thanks for being with us. I'm Jefferson Smith. I am sitting in for Thom Hartmann. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. We are in the final stretch. Important stuff always happens in the final stretch. And right now, the important thing that's going to happen is we're going to hear from Kathy on Free Speech TV from Madison, Wisconsin. How you doing, Kathy?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I just want to alert people, and I hope if you're going to be there tomorrow, you will make the announcement. I'll send an email and back it up with some more information for you. That on Wednesday, Felix Sater, if anybody recognizes that name, is going to be testifying in an open hearing before the House Intelligence Committee. Apparently, it's scheduled to start at 9:30 in the morning. Felix Sater is a guy with a very checkered history, long-time Trump associate, although Trump denied that, but golly, he lied. Wow, who thunk it? He was also involved with Michael Cohen. They were all involved in the Trump Tower Moscow project. Apparently, he's going to be testifying about that. He apparently claims that he was dealing with Russians in order to help make that project possible. And, of course, as you know, there's all these crazy things about Russian banks and all that kind of stuff. So just people, it ain't over till it's over. And I encourage people to watch for that and especially watch for the news later on. It'll be on C-SPAN, and I hope that it will be enlightening. The other thing that people have to watch is that there will be attacks on his credibility. They are justified. He's got a very shady past. However, it's the same deal with Michael Cohen. Is he telling the truth now? And so, credibility you can determine by their comportment and, the information they provide, and everybody can make that judgment. So this is another piece of the puzzle. We don't know the puzzle yet, so.
Kathy, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Todd wins the Most Patient Listener Award, calling in from Tipton, Indiana. Go ahead, Todd.
Hey, thanks a lot. Hey, I don't see how, with what Mueller has done, how do we avoid the retribution and the violence that Trump's going to call on now? Because you already have McCarthy calling for Adam Schiff to leave the House, not just resign his position as chairman, but to leave the House completely. I just don't see how we avoid this now.
It's a really important question. We had a call, and I saw the sort of tease line, and the person dropped off. I don't think they waited around, but saying that I think that the words I saw was somebody wanted to say liberals need to apologize for the investigation, and that this is the move has been, and to me it's sort of clear, and it's been kind of clear from the beginning. The first move is to limit the scope of what we can be concerned about. Don't be concerned about the fact that the Russian government interfered with American elections so that Donald Trump could win. That is in the Mueller report. Even Bill Barr says that's in the Mueller report. Don't be concerned about that. Only be concerned if that was at the request of or in close cahoots with, in an operational way, members of the and I'm capitalizing here, Trump campaign, end quote. Limit it to that. Don't worry about obstruction of justice. Don't worry about a vast scheme of corruption. Don't worry about whether Trump Moscow was, in fact, something that even didn't have anything to do with the election itself, or if it's not chargeably proved to have something to do with the election, that it's still sort of tricky if you've got somebody running for president, trying to be president, setting campaign policy, including their policy on whether or not Russian sanctions would continue, and they're doing that at the same time that you're trying to buck for a project in the country, a project that is being where the head of the country is being offered a hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars worth penthouse suite inside. That first step is shrink the scope, limit the scope. The next step is limit what witnesses are called and limit what witnesses can say, or get witnesses to lie, threaten them to lie some, or to clam up, or to say they don't remember, and reward those, or hint that you might, go more than hint that you might, reward those who say what you want them to say. Then get in place an attorney general, instead of the attorney general who recused himself, get in place an attorney general who is, we know two things about. One, we know that they have said that attorney general in the run-up to this said, I don't think obstruction of justice is something that really a president can do very much of, except for in a few limited cases, because they're allowed to offer pardons to whomever they want. And we know who was called the cover-up general by William Safire of the New York Times based on his role the last time he served in this position for the elder Bush. That we know those things. So then you get that guy to then put additional filter. And then you go out and say, you call this thing, which was not exoneration, even after all those filters, you say it's full exoneration. And then after saying full exoneration, you say, now punish your enemies. Now revenge. Now that justifies whatever we want to do. And they should go out and apologize. Folks, it was important to have an investigation. Our conservative listeners, I hope you'll hear this. It was important to have an investigation. Let's just say, even if we had averred at the very beginning, if we just stipulated Donald Trump gets to stay to be president, Nancy Pelosi already said she wasn't going for impeachment. Let's just say that was never the issue. We just want to understand, if the Russian government was trying to influence our elections, what they did to influence our elections, and how come they did it. That investigation is deeply important for our democracy. Deeply important. There should be no apology for conducting that investigation. There should only be gratitude that there were some resources applied to conduct that investigation. It's really important. One of the reasons it is important to me to carefully characterize what has happened, and I am not saying that there is chargeable evidence that Donald Trump was in cahoots with Vladimir Putin to get him elected president. That in fact, I never really thought that conversation probably happened. I think it's a little weird that he would have conversations without any recording there, without any staff there, and then to take away the notes of the interpreter. That's a little weird. Okay, but we have to be careful with the characterization, because if you characterize it like CNN did, where it says, no conspiracy, that was not the conclusion. It was no chargeable conspiracy. I'm going to step on my soapbox to hear from you, but thank you for saying so. Tom, from Martinsburg, West Virginia, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have one comment to make. I hope there's more than one copy of that report.
Why? You think they're going to destroy it? You think they're going to burn it like one of the members of Congress just asked that happen?
I think they'll edit it.
Yeah, they'll be. I mean, somebody will have a PDF. I'm not that worried. I'm not that worried about that. I think the way you do this stuff, you don't do this stuff with the outright provable lie. You don't do this stuff with the real obvious burning of evidence. The way you do this stuff is by limiting the scope, by redacting documents and claiming that there's national security interests that are why you redacted it, and then just make sure the final decision maker on your judgment call. So first you apply a judgment call. You don't even have to destroy stuff. You just have to apply a judgment call. And then make sure whoever the final arbiter is of the judgment call, whether that's the Attorney General, Bill Barr, or the President, Donald Trump, or the Supreme Court, now welcome Brett Kavanaugh, that the final arbiter of that judgment call is someone who's on the team. You don't even have to do the other stuff, but I hear where you're coming from.
All right. I sure hope you're right.
Well, what I said might be worse. I don't know if you should hope that I'm right. What I said might be worse. What I said is it might not matter what's in it. But I think ultimately where I'm going to go in the end of the show is that, and I did think we owed it to the facts and owed it to our audience. There's been so much attention on this to spend real time today going after it. But I do want to spend the most of this week, and even in my closing words today, not about the Mueller investigation, because to me the big things we got to be working for are how do we make sure we don't eviscerate the planet with floods and fires? How do we make sure the middle class is still a thing? How do we make sure that democracy is still a thing? And to me, that is not all about a single president, and certainly not about a single investigation. But Tom, thanks so much for calling.
You're very welcome.
Mark from San Francisco, go ahead.
Yeah, basically, I think I'd like to see Mueller in front of Congress.
Yeah. Agreed.
That needs to be done. 2 years of this, we need to have him and have our people go through it with him, because we'll get answers I think we're looking for from him, not this stooge that Trump appointed.
Yeah, and we'll get some answers, and I think at least then we'll understand a little bit more. But I hope that some of our analysis won't just be like, how do we dig in further to the Mueller report, but if what happened there was a limiting of scope, was making sure, okay, well, we're going to check to see what the interactions were between the Trump campaign and people directly linked to Putin or Putin himself, and instead say, well, what's going on with general corruption over here? But thanks for calling. Appreciate it. Hampton Bays, New York says, Jim, Democrats lied on the Mueller report. Go ahead, Jim.
Hey, how are you?
Doing all right.
I just don't understand why we don't get Christopher Steele and his other cohorts that wrote that ridiculous dossier, get them in front of Congress, give one of them immunity, and let them spill their guts. Who paid them? Who told them to write that? Who told them that they had Michael Cohen in Prague, which no proof of? How about we take that whole piece of garbage that started this whole thing and rip it apart and put somebody in jail? Because to sit here from day one to think Donald Trump met with the Russians and somehow sent us, some kind of message for us to vote for Donald Trump is just ridiculous. And what the Russians did is working. They're tearing this country apart. They didn't care if Donald Trump got elected or Hillary Clinton. They love this. They're going to pull this country apart, and it's working right now.
Agree with the second part. On the first part, so you think they tried to interfere with the elections? You don't think it mattered, or you? I wasn't sure. And by the way, getting Christopher Steele, if there was a way to make sure the guy didn't get assassinated, getting Christopher Steele in front of Congress, I'm all for it. But what is it? I mean, I know the narrative. I mean, I listen to enough right-wing radio and I watch enough Fox News to understand the narrative. It's like all this stuff started with Christopher Steele. That's not my own view, by the way, and that therefore people should be. Jim, you still with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
All right. So are you thinking that the first portion of the Mueller report, or at least the shadow of the Mueller report that we're aware of, is that there was Russian interference in the election? Do you think that that's not accurate, or that you don't care, or you still just blame all of that on Chris Steele?
I think it's 100% accurate.
Yeah.
That there was interference. Of course there was, but I think the problem is what the Republicans think they were doing and what the Democrats think they were doing is wrong. I think what the Russians wanted was, listen, the Russians were giving money to Black Lives Matter too. That's been proven too.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to build two opposite groups, far left, far right, and they're going to crush this country. They don't have to send a single missile here. And you could see the proof. You could see on MSNBC, you could see on Fox, you could see them ripping us apart, and everything that has to do with taking care of people and the environment, like you just said 5 minutes ago, is going to crap. Nobody's caring. Nobody cares.
Jim, I think your point. I disagree with a few pieces of it, but I think your essential point is actually deeply important, and that how do we keep our eyes ahead on the most important stuff that's impacting the country? Where I would quibble a bit is that as you would say, well, they don't care who won. I would disagree with that. I think they probably did care a little bit. I think they had a big objective of chaos. I mean, first of all, what the heck do I know? But I think they did have an objective of chaos. We could argue about which is their first objective. I do think that they would prefer to have somebody who was more in line with what they wanted. And I do think it's interesting to find out if it's, well, is that just because this person has policy views that are more in alignment with Russian policy interests, or is it also because of other stuff? That said, I recognize in the investigation of that last question, it does mean that we're spending so much time on that and missing spending time on other stuff.
Right. It's not only the time, it's the thought process, and it's the anger of people that's really getting to us now, and that's going to tear us apart. And it's happening right now. I mean, you have so many people so far left and so far right. It's insanity. It has nothing to do with the founding values of this country. You know, it's just
I'm laboring. I'm sticking with this. I'm sticking with this call for a little bit, listeners, because there's something really important something important here. And I think that very often I'm gonna interpret for me. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm gonna interpret for me when you say far left and far right. What I hear, or at least what I am concerned about, is when we are motivated primarily not by, in our political work, motivated not by what we're trying to accomplish or how we're trying to make the world better, but motivated more by how we're trying to destroy somebody who wears a different color T-shirt or voted for someone else. If we're motivated primarily by that kind of partisanship, I think that tears us up. Advocating strongly for what you care about in order to make the world better, I think that's, you know, that to me, I want to reward, not punish.
Yeah, we're really, you know,
Oh, they're taking us away from break. Jim, thanks for sticking with us for a little bit. We'll be right back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We are here for your final minutes of the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. We're going to start with speed round, and then I will give my closing thoughts of what I think happens now, or maybe even what I hope happens now. Speed round, that means everybody try to be quick. Tim from Beaverton, Oregon, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, there's a very simple answer to this, and nobody seems to want to put it together. Trump didn't need to collude. He didn't need to obstruct because the guy's a complete imbecile. What the Russians did is they met with him and said, this is what we're going to do, Donald, and then once we get it accomplished and you're in office, this is what you're going to have to do for us. That's why he's in Putin's back pocket. I don't see how people don't understand that.
That is the Sarah Kendzior view, that it was pretty clear. He didn't have to lift many fingers. And in fact, if they carry that further, like, listen, Trump wasn't a criminal mastermind. They just left the door open. And they never really thought it would get this far, and they probably never thought they were going to win. But they thought it would help with with their relationships with Russian money, and maybe to get their brand out there, and who knows, maybe to go a little bit further in the election than they anticipated. And before they knew it, it had gotten worse. And the reason it seemed like obstruction is because they were trying to put some of the genie back in the bottle. But they weren't trying to hack the emails; they just left the door open. But yeah, appreciate the call, Barbara. We're in speed round, Sun City, Arizona.
Okay. Iran-Contra, the aftermath on Wikipedia, read it. It's all there. And the Magnitsky Act is really what started this, with John McCain promoting sanctions against Russia. And then just read the Iran-Contra aftermath. People died. Barr pardoned everybody as Attorney General, including Caspar Weinberger, who never even got to trial.
Yep, and this is the piece that Thom Hartmann has just written, and that he'll be talking, I'm sure, when he gets back, and I was talking about earlier. Barbara, thank you so much. John from Cumberland, Maryland.
Hey, howdy there. Listen, I agree with what the young lady just said about the Magnitsky Act. I wish people would link that more clearly with Russian sanctions, because I believe that was what was being discussed in Trump Tower by his kids instead of about some orphans issue. It was the Magnitsky Act, where Putin and his oligarchs are the big beneficiaries of getting that act lifted, because they got about $1 gazillion in foreign banks, you know, being seized because of that. And if nobody knows who Magnitsky is, he was murdered by the Russians in prison because he was the accountant for Bill Browder's firm, the Hermitage Foundation, which set this whole thing off. Bill Browder was an early investor in post-Soviet Russia, and they basically cleaned him out, and the people who lost the most money in the Hermitage Foundation seizure were the Russian people. And this Magnitsky Act, enacted in 2012 by Congress and President Obama, has got to stay in place. And I'll tell you something, you know, this is the quid pro quo that went on up in that tower, and it's the reason that Putin and Trump are linked. But I don't think you're going to see that in the report. That's all I got.
Appreciate the time, John. Tony, speed round from Toledo.
Yeah, I just want to comment the fact that the Mueller report is just another sign that we really don't have a democracy in this country anymore. We have a totalitarian republic. I mean, they do that all the time in totalitarian societies. They undereducate the people. You know, they get them back and forth talking about other things. And meanwhile, they take our money. They do what they want with it. They control the mass people. I mean, it's just history all over again. And the only way it's ever going to stop is if the people wake up and get together and go to D.C. and camp out and say, we're not going to leave until you people are out of there and you meet with our representatives and we have new elections. It's just going to go on and on and on.
And Mark, Tony, yeah, that's pretty well adjacent to my final thoughts that I'm going to offer in about a minute and a half. Linda, speed round.
Yes, I want to suggest the hypothesis that Trump could be being blackmailed from Russia, because didn't Michael Cohen mention he had business relations trying to build a Trump Tower over there before the election? Yeah, that is what much of the opening hypothesis has been. A different Mark from Prairie du Sac, Wisconsin. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Go ahead, Mark.
You are. If you're innocent, you don't ask for evidence to be destroyed. That's what they did here in Wisconsin when the John Doe 2 investigation closed up. Our Supreme Court said destroy the evidence. You just don't. If you are innocent, you don't need the evidence destroyed.
I hear you. So let me connect a couple dots and then close. I want to connect the something that Mark said, which is that this is too much of a distraction. It's tearing us apart. Russia wasn't trying to buy a president. They were trying to rip up a nation. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. And then Tony, who says this ain't a democracy. We've got to we've got to do more than just rely on a Mueller report. We've got to, he said, camp out. And then John, who linked, said this is really all about the Magnitsky Act. Let me connect those things. To me, the deep theme, the bass note that needs to undergird the cacophonous treble is that there is, in fact, it's not just about Trump, and it's not just about Putin, it's not just about one report. It is about the corruption and subversion of democracy by oligarchy. That's the big story. That's actually what connects the Magnitsky Act and even Mark's comment that it's tearing us apart. That what we have to be vigilant about is how do we make sure that the people are in charge? And not just folks who hold tremendous financial resource are in charge. And how do we make sure that the system of decision-making is there to benefit the most people, not only benefit the people with the largest financial resource? That's how this stuff is connected. That if you recognize that even the worst hypothesis, that what this might really have been about was just a big money grab or a money holding on to by international and national oligarchs. And what they wanted to make sure was that there wasn't a system of democracy that would make sure that good things were happening and that money wasn't threatened. What I'm saying is this might be good news. It might be good news. I'm not saying a silver lining, but at least a steel lining, and we need to steel ourselves. We shouldn't have expected that one investigation would correct democracy, because it hasn't been one president who has been subverting it. We have to work more than just for the next couple of minutes and more than just one radio show. We've got to work for the next years, not for one election, but for years. We're going to be talking about that all week. We'll be touching on the Mueller stuff, I'm sure. What we're really going to be talking about is what's really important. You are the coalition of the benevolent irrational, the good people doing good things for no good reason. Without you, democracy is not possible. With you, we got a chance. Thanks for being with us today. I'll be back tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From UN.
We say fight back!